was a letter sent in on behalf of SciTech, which has now put me in a conflict position on anything to do with this application. So I'm going to declare a conflict on the land only, and nothing to do if we discuss arenas, but if it's on the site, I'm going to declare a conflict.
Thank you very much. Are there any other members of council with a pecuniary interest this evening? Having seen none, then I'll ask the clerk to open the meeting and explain the process, if you would please, and the confirmation of the advertisement that appeared in the local newspaper. Mr. Clerk?
Through your worship, we did run an advertisement for this special meeting in the Niagara Falls Review. It ran, I believe, on Monday, April the 2nd. We requested that anybody who wanted to appear as a deputation that they register by the end of that week, actually the Thursday, because we're going into a long weekend situation. And in a few cases, I actually emailed certain interested parties that I knew had an interest in this matter if they wanted to attend tonight's meeting. We've done this in the past for similar meetings. Millennium Trail, for example, is the one that comes to mind, where we ask the public to register in advance. I think you'll find that there are about a half a dozen speakers this evening, in addition to our consultants who will be making presentations, and I think you'll get differing viewpoints and different interests with relation to this matter. So I think definitely all interests will be articulated this evening. Just note, the meeting is not being broadcast live. However, it is being filmed, as you can see. Cogeco will be playing it tomorrow at 12:30 and rebroadcasting it on Saturday.
Thank you very much, Mr. Iafita. At this time, I'd like to call on the first presentation on deputations, Mr. Mike Cushman, Niagara Falls resident. Mr. Cushman. And for the benefit of the record, Mr. Cushman, would you please confirm your address?
Sure. Could I hand these out to council?
Certainly.
Okay, my name is Mike Cushman. I live on 6246 Arid Street in Niagara Falls. I'm a steel worker by trade, but have taken a particular interest in the environmental issues in Niagara Falls for some years now. I've come to the City Council yet again to argue that building an arena on the old Cyanamid property is a grave mistake. I am a layman. I do not have any fancy letters that come after my name, but I've spent more than 15 years studying this land and the effect this company's operations have had on my community. As part of that study, I have read the Niagara River Toxics Committee, I've read the Gardner and Lee report, and read the Terra Investigations report. I've read air monitoring. I've read the Ryerson report. I've had meetings with representatives from SciTech and read many, many newspaper articles on a company called the Cyanamid, which is SciTech. Let me tell you a little bit about this company. In 1990, Cyanamid was listed as the highest polluter in the United States in some of the articles I read. Cyanamid was also a huge polluter in South Africa, where they were transporting tons of toxic substances and heavy metals to South Africa and burying them. I must ask, out of all the consulting the city has paid for to try and convince us that this land is safe, how much consulting was done to research the city's potential partners in this development? How much research has been done on the company SciTech or the related company American Cyanamid? Cyanamid was founded 4 years after our great city was born. For most of the last century, it was the largest chemical manufacturer in the world. But how much do we really know about them? Niagara Falls has had a strange bond with places like South Africa, Trenton, New Jersey, West Virginia, Wagamon, Louisiana, Wilford, New Haven, Nelson County, Bridgewater, New Jersey, Tampa Bay, Florida, Allentown, Pennsylvania, and Fort Worth, Texas. These are all places that have felt the mark of cyanamide, exact same as here. Niagara Falls suffers at least 3 toxic land sites from cyanamide that I know of. And in all these places, cyanamide were not only found guilty of pollution and corruption, the ground pollution was left there for decades, and then only when someone tried to use the land, it was found barrels and containers and tanks found buried in the ground. In the United States and South Africa, millions of taxpayers' dollars had been spent to ensure environment and public were not put at risk. I don't understand why we here in Niagara Falls, Canada, don't do the same. Cyanamide has the most to gain from this deal, as they will be able to wash their hands of the responsibility for this land. In my opinion, the risk assessment was a joke, where cyanides and ammonias, already known to be in standing puddles of water on that property, disappeared from the list in the risk assessment. Predictions, assumptions, and estimates are not acceptable when we have nothing built on that land and have the chance to enforce a proper cleanup. Once that is done, that is the time to build what you want. I thought science was based on facts, but when I read the risk assessment, I felt like I was reading fiction. I asked this council to read these articles I gave you and understand the realities of what this company did in the United States and South Africa, and ask you ensure that the same tragedies don't befall us here. Test all the lands to ensure our children have a future without toxins from this site. I beg you not to build on that property without tests that are done today through air, ground, and water monitoring, done to the tightest measures to ensure environmental problems are not there. Liabilities will become a problem when people that are working there become sick or ill from the toxic exposures on that property. The problem is, we are talking about our children who will be the ones working there. I do not want to leave this legacy to our children or grandchildren. Do we need an arena so bad that we are willing to risk our children's lives? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cushman. The next speaker and presenter is Mr. Eric Gillespie. Welcome.
Thank you, Your Worship.
And again, for the record, Mr. Gillespie, would you please identify yourself and your firm?
Yes, Your Worship. Eric Gillespie, and I'm appearing today on behalf of Unite Here Canada, and my firm is the firm of Cunningham and Gillespie, LLP.
Thank you.
Your Worship, I come before yourself and members of council this evening to address, based on the knowledge we have right at this moment, concerns that still appear to be outstanding in relation to the SciTech proposal. More specifically, I think the fundamental question that in my submission to Your Worship and Council is still an open question is, what is the real cost of the SciTech arena proposal going to be? As I assume Council is aware from the documents that are part of the record at the moment, Council is going to be asked to vote this evening on a bylaw that sets out, or attaches to it more properly, an agreement. And this is an agreement dated March 15th, 2007.
Mr. Gillespie, I'm just being advised, again, that's not the case. So,
Then, in that case, this highlights precisely the problem with this proceeding. As it stands right now, we are running into a problem of natural justice and procedural fairness with the way this matter is being conducted. And I say this with all due respect, but we are in a situation at the moment where it is unclear, certainly to our client, exactly what is before the city, what the terms of the agreements are, what the science is that's being relied on, and what exactly council will be doing this evening.
Perhaps, Mr. Gillespie, by the time the evening's over, you'll be advised, and you're here to present the deputation with respect to that. Nothing has been concluded, as you're well aware. The record of site condition, as you are well aware, has been issued, and but you'll be hearing evidence and information from the presenters later on behind you this evening. So if you have issues with regard to your questions, please pose them as a question, and hopefully we'll have those questions answered by the time the evening is over.
Well, with respect, Your Worship, I think the concern is simply going to be this. You've just indicated on the record, Your Worship, that information that will be new to my client, and it sounds like very substantial information, I've reviewed the materials, is going to come out this evening.
Yes. No, I didn't say it would be new. There was information. We did have an information session before. There was information supplied by your client that questioned what was being presented to council. I know the clerk would like to make a comment, and I'll allow him to do so in a minute. So we're here to allow you to make your deputation, to make your point. So I don't think there's an issue in inference with respect to any matters having been prejudged. Mr. Clerk?
Well, through the chair, just to reiterate, we did do a similar session to this back in October of 2006. It happened downstairs in our committee room number 2. It was an information session for council. It was decided that it would be a good idea to do a similar presentation now, since we have a new council in which 3 members were not a part of that council in October 2006. So a lot of the information this evening is really information that the majority of members of this council have already seen, and I would argue that it isn't new information that you're being blindsided with by any stretch of the imagination. Obviously, there's been some developments since October of 2006, and in fact, Unite Here has questioned a lot of things since October of 2006, and one of the reasons tonight is to hopefully clarify any concerns that have been raised in the public. So, you know, this is an information meeting. You're free to make your deputation, obviously, and you know, there's no efforts on our part, definitely, to thwart any natural justice or procedural fairness.
And Your Worship, I think we've already hit the problem, because I stand before you right now prepared to make a presentation on a document that I'm now being advised is irrelevant.
Not at all. I think we're here. If you had recalled, the meeting in October was an information meeting, and I don't know whether members of your client's organization had a chance to stay for the entire presentation, but since that time there's been information that your client has raised that we hope to deal with this evening, and we brought together all the parties so the proper questions could be asked by you and members of your client's organization.
And with respect to Your Worship, the matters that I wished to address to yourself and council this evening relate to primarily the legal side of this equation, not the scientific. And
well, our clerk would like to make a further comment with respect to that.
By all means, present them. You're free to make your presentation on that, and you know, there's no effort to stop you on that.
Sure.
And the issue is simply, as soon as I turned to the document, that it was certainly our client's understanding is the document the council is going to be asked to vote on and approve this evening in terms of agreements.
No. There isn't, again, Mr. Gillespie, there isn't a recommendation for council this evening. There's a report for the information of council that is identified as CAO 2007-06. We have a bylaw to pass with regard to ratifying and confirming the actions of what council has done tonight, and the clerk again could address that. Mr. Clerk?
Through the chair, Mr. Gillespie did get a copy of the agenda earlier today, so he should be aware of what's here. I think he is referring to a bylaw that had been on a past council meeting that council had asked for deferral as they got more information on that. And like I said, by all means, Mr. Gillespie, you can comment on that this evening. That bylaw is not before us this evening. And the report that's on the council agenda is an information report, and council can decide to do what they wish with that information report. But this evening, we're not passing the bylaw to do with any legal agreement, and if the CAO or anybody else wants to reiterate that.
So, again, and I appreciate the clarification through you,
Certainly.
Your Worship. As a practical matter, then, that, I think, leaves me in a position where, for practical purposes, the presentation that I was going to make, and I appreciate there's a number of other delegates who want to speak this evening, so I don't want to hold things up, but the presentation I was going to make speaks to the bylaw and to that issue, viewing it as a central concern. At the same time, if you're saying it's not before council tonight, then at that point, that presentation isn't relevant. What I will say, and I simply put this on as a matter of record, is this. I learned, and I apologize, not knowing the protocol, when a member of council raises their hand, does that take priority?
No, you can speak. Go ahead, you have the floor. I'll acknowledge that.
Thank you. It came to my attention, I was in court in Hamilton from literally 9 a.m. this morning until 4:40 this afternoon. So it came to my attention through a telephone call that a report had been produced that was in the public domain at approximately 10 after 5 while I was on the road down here. It then came into my hands approximately 7 minutes ago for the first time. The issue, and I put this purely as a matter of procedure, before your worship, that I guess I'm going to have tonight is this. I do see portions of this report directly address issues raised by my client. And in the same way, I appreciate that back on January 22nd, when I appeared on behalf of the same client before your worship and council, at that time, matters were brought forward that it was the response of city staff that they were going to require some time to deal with that because there were substantive issues and they had just seen them and so on. I find myself in exactly the same position tonight on behalf of my client as staff found themselves in on January 22nd, where something has just come out into the public domain, just come to my attention, and I don't even know what it says, quite literally, because 7 minutes just wasn't enough time to read it during Mr. Cushman's presentation, trying to listen to him as well. In my respectful submission, the basic rules of natural justice and procedural fairness, which do apply in this forum as in all adjudicative or quasi-adjudicative type forums, would dictate that our client be provided with the same opportunity that council voted to provide staff with the last time. And that was an opportunity to reflect and respond on the information that I don't even know what it says right now. And on that basis, and I'll just finish my submission just so it's clear for the record, it would be my submission that it would be inappropriate and frankly contrary to those basic rules to set what in effect would be a double standard between staff and the public. Because if something just comes to staff's attention and they're permitted the opportunity to have time to respond to it appropriately, in my submission the same fundamental procedures should be in place for the public. There isn't a double standard here.
Mr. Gillespie, I appreciate your comments. I've sat in enough tribunals to appreciate the fact that there won't be any impairment of the natural process of natural justice that would prevail here. I think we have more of an issue that you might want to get into some technical matters. I'm not sure if you're prepared to proceed on the basis, but I'll allow the clerk to make some comments, if he would, with respect to the updated information you're referring to. Mr. Clerk?
Well, in fairness to Mr. Gillespie, the report that is provided for you was finalized yesterday. It was released to council yesterday evening. They got it not much before you did. It was just our timelines, obviously, with a special meeting. I did take the effort to email you a copy early this morning. I know that you're a busy man and you have a schedule and may not see it, but that information report is an information report, strictly that. It's not asking for any decision this evening. And similarly, when you came here on January 22nd, you made a presentation on what I don't, to describe it as, I guess, child care issues vis-a-vis the property. That was new information to staff, and we took it under advisement and responded. I would suggest you make your presentation this evening. We don't know what it is. We can't presuppose what you're saying in this presentation, but we have our staff and our consultants that will hopefully be able to respond, at least in a rudimentary manner, to what maybe you're presenting here. And, that may be the subject of a future report if that's council's direction. So if I were you, I would err on the side of getting the information out there, because that's the whole purpose of this meeting tonight, to get information out. Secondly, it's not an adversarial forum here, so we're not, conducting a trial where we're expecting you to respond. We're not putting you on the defensive. We're merely providing all the information on the public record.
Okay. Mr. Gillespie, do you want to respond to that?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I appreciated, through you, sir, Mr. Arafida's acknowledgement that his staff was in the same position that I'm now in, and I think that it's just going to come back to that. Fundamentally, I am certainly prepared to proceed with my presentation, but at the same time, it is not going to be responsive to this report. Again, as Mr. Arafida, through you quite correctly indicated, today just happened to be a day that I was in court, courtroom 326, on the fifth floor in the courthouse in Hamilton, literally all day. So on that basis, I did not see the report. Consequently, the scope of this meeting wasn't clear to me. I'm happy to proceed with this presentation, but it's going to be not relevant to the actual report that you're seeing. It's dealing with the proposed bylaw issue, and it's a question of whether council is going to find that in any way helpful, or whether we should simply be proceeding with these other matters.
Well, just to respond to that, if I may, Mr. Gillespie, the bylaw will come back at a later meeting, and you can certainly make your presentation known then. I'd like to allow Councillor Inoy to make a comment. She's been anxious to say something. Councillor?
Mr. Mayor, we've been 20 minutes on debating whether we should listen to Mr. Gillespie speak. Mr. Gillespie, we've taken our time. We're here. Everybody's in the same room. We know how to read. We've read the report. I take detailed notes every time you're here. I think I've asked more questions when your group is here than anybody. Make your presentation. Because we're taking notes and we're weighing all of it. Every party's in this room. This is the first time we've had that opportunity to do it, and I don't want to have to do it again.
Bishop, I'm hearing two different directions here. One staff saying it's going to come back on another time, one...
No. Let's not confuse
Okay,
it. Please.
and that's not what I said.
Just a moment, please.
I said you make your presentation, and we're smart enough to take our notes and understand what you're saying.
And Mr. Gillespie, if you're prepared for a discussion with respect to the proposed bylaw, that will come up at a later date. So you're welcome to come back and discuss that at that point. But I'm not sure if you're ready to proceed today on the basis of the technical information that we were trying to answer with regard to your client's concerns.
No, and that's the procedural justice and natural fairness concern, because I don't even at this moment know what the technical issues are going to be. I'm going to sit here, hear them for the first time, and then...
Well, your client actually raised some issues, as the clerk referred to earlier, with respect to the facility being used as a daycare facility. Mr. Clerk?
One final thing I'll say, this isn't the first time United here has heard this presentation. The presentation was done in October. I realize, Mr. Gillespie, you weren't present at that time, but Mr. Clark certainly was, and a lot of what's being broadcast tonight is exactly the same.
And with respect, Your Worship, through you, the only issue is simply going to be, it's my belief on the very brief review I had that it's going to go further than the October presentation, because the issues in October were different. And I think that's going to be a matter of the public record.
You have an opportunity to make a presentation. I think council is anxious to hear what you and your clients have to say, and we're allowing you to do so. So that's the purpose. And there's no adversarial position that we're taking, as we said to you earlier. And there's no issue that's going to prevent the natural course of justice to take place.
And then just to be clear and to save everybody time, respecting that we've got a long list of people who would like to address council, I believe that it is fair to council and to everyone present tonight to not focus on the matters raised in the bylaw. That will come before you at a different time. I think it is more appropriate to make that presentation at that time where that issue is the live issue. On the environmental issue...
That's your prerogative, sir.
And on the environmental issue, the difficulty I still with great respect, labor under is I have no idea what else is going to be said tonight, so I have no presentation to address an unknown, because that report, as Mr. Ayerfida just said, came out yesterday to councilors late yesterday. I don't know what it says.
Well, if you have a moment to take a chance to read it, I think I can give you that opportunity to do so during the course of the presentations of the other deputations that are coming forward. And if you wish to make a comment at the end, you'll have a chance. It really is an update on what's happened since the last meeting. But Mr. Clerk, once again.
The fact of the matter is, we're not asking Unite Here and Mr. Gillespie to respond to that report. We're asking them to make their presentation based on their issues, their concerns that they've articulated in the public for the last year. To me, it's pretty simple.
And with respect, Your Worship, we have the right to respond to the report if it identifies our client and says certain things, and I don't know what it says, so I'll leave it at that.
We will leave it at that.
Aside
I have a couple other councilors who wish to make comments. Councilor Thompson and Councilor Pietrangelo.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think, Mr. Gillespie, you're making a mistake. Maybe we're here tonight because of some of the council who is back on here or have been re-elected, wanted to have a complete hearing with respect to this matter as a result of some of the comments that you made at the last meeting and some of the concerns that you expressed. I came here tonight to listen to your presentation, and I think you're missing a real opportunity if you don't make that presentation. And if you're asking about the Environmental Review Tribunal decision, I got it when I came in the door tonight. The council has not seen this. I have not read it. I'm not in a position to make any decision with respect to anything tonight, bylaw or anything else, when I'm handed documents like this at the last minute. So please, we're here to listen to you. Let's make your presentation, give everybody the opportunity to air all of their concerns and differences, and give us the opportunity to look at all the information and make a decision sometime in the future. That's what I'm here for.
Your Worship, I think it's best if I step aside, take you up on your very generous offer. I'll listen to the other presentations, review materials, we'll get on with it, and let other people have their proper...
Councilor Pietrangelo.
Yeah, Your Worship, and I guess through yourself to Mr. Gillespie, thank you for coming back to this council. Again, as Councilor Thompson and Mayor Salsi and also Mr. Ayerfida has explained, this is an information session, a time for you to get your concerns out. I don't really understand the need to actually read the information that's been put out, but nonetheless, I do have some questions of yourself. Last time you were here, and you just spoke about your concern for hearing something for the very first time. It was almost as how we felt on January 22nd when you came here and you made your presentation. In your presentation, you talked about the fact that you said that there was absolutely no assessment of lead and thallium that was done. That was in your PowerPoint presentation. You also said that SciTech had applied for the rights to have a daycare. And the third thing that you said was that they were emphatically turned down because the results that came back were not good for them. Now, I asked you that question in two different ways, and both times you responded, yes, they did apply, and yes, they were turned down. We have since received documentation that states the exact opposite. So, I'm just wondering whereabouts you stand on this. Do you have any documentation that you can give to me to prove your case, or what you told council?
Through you, Mayor,
Yes, sir.
Mr. Mayor, if I may respond. First of all, when we discussed this the last time before council, what we said was absolutely 100% correct, and I think you can go back to those slides. I think with the greatest of respect to Alderman Pietrangelo, he has mischaracterized some of my statements, and I'm sure it's only inadvertent, but that is not what was said. What was said was that the application by SciTech included 4 scenarios, and one of those scenarios was a daycare, and that is an absolute fact, and you can all, as members of council, go to that record and check.
Well, Mr. Gillespie, I think tonight you'll hear something to the contrary, but again, there'll be an opportunity for you to make a comment later after you hear from the people who are making their presentations. Councilor Pietrangelo.
Your Worship, I just want to take this one step further because I think Mr. Gillespie is challenging my character here. And in the documentation that we've received, Mr. Gillespie, it says emphatically that if a daycare was applied for, that it would be approved based on the testing results that came back. Now, I'm asking you again to provide some documentation that would state your position.
And our position is very clearly stated, Your Worship. That
So
is
your position is wrong.
Well, with the greatest respect, if I may finish.
Yes, please respond.
Thank you. that appears, and I don't know because he hasn't identified the source of that opinion, that appears to be the opinion of some consultant somewhere. We have obtained at this point an opinion from a very reputable, internationally recognized consulting firm that says that based on the information that was provided to the Ministry of the Environment, the Ministry made the correct decision and denied the use of a daycare. So the absolute proven fact right now on the record is the MOE has limited the use of those lands, and that's right in the record of site condition. And that's an absolute fact.
And just to respond, Your Worship, I mean, Mr. Gillespie talks about not having access to information. Can you please give me the information that supports your submission?
Your Worship,
Can you please?
Mr. Peter Angelo should be directed to read the MOE order, because it expressly excludes
In other words,
where
you
you see
can't-
claims that's an automatic.
In other words, you can't give it to me.
No, I'm telling you, the MOEs will give the decision, and a private consultant
Let's not
doesn't
engage in the
overrule.
debate at this time. I think by the time this meeting is concluded, you'll have that information, Mr. Gillespie. As the council suggested, we don't have any evidence to substantiate your claim as well, and I think you've heard other councils submit to you that it would be in your best move to really disclose any concerns you have so that
My
matters can be
concern
addressed.
is that we're now headed directly into the position I was concerned about. I'm about to hear now for the first time about some consultant somewhere who said something to find an opinion. I'd like the opinion produced, I'd like the consultant available, and I'd like time to deal with the issue.
Yeah, I
Because
think
my
if
credibility
you
on
just...
my clients.
Yes,
has
if you
been
just bear
challenged.
with us by the time the presenters have made their presentations, then I think you'll have that information. So if you'd like to
For
reserve...
the first time, thank you, Your Worship.
That's not correct. No. Mr. Gillespie, that isn't correct as well, as you heard a number of people. So I think you're actually twisting the facts here, because I think you brought the matter forward. And at the same time, I think as members of council said, they wanted to hear your concerns, but at this point, I think your information is incorrect. So at this
Your Worship,
point...
then I simply ask through you what report Mr. Peter Angelo was referring to and when it was disclosed to my client.
Councilor, do you wish to address that? You want to wait?
Your Worship, I mean, we do have a letter from SciTech. I did receive the letter, and actually I emailed Mr. Clark from your client's firm, Your Worship, to let him know that I did have this letter. And I have it here. It says, Ethan, the fact that the site was evaluated for a daycare is not what we spoke about. I am already aware of the facts you gave me. To go back to our conversation, it was reported to our council that SciTech had applied for and was turned down for the rights to have a daycare facility on site. This is what was presented to council that I found alarming, and I did. I have since received information telling me this is untrue. Can you send me documentation relating to the application for a daycare facility and the subsequent denial, as was claimed in open council by you, Mr. Gillespie? I've never received anything, Your Worship, and quite frankly, I don't
Your Worship,
expect
the
it.
documentation is the SciTech submission to the MOE and the MOE's response, and that's all a matter of public
Well,
record.
that will be addressed this evening as well, so we'll have a chance, and you can listen closely, and
Thank you.
we'll have a chance to qualify that. Okay, Mr. Clerk, do you have another comment?
Well, I mean, this is kind of foolish because, I mean, the whole point of tonight's meeting was to bring everybody in the same room, all of the important people who have information on this property, and present the information. What I see is going to happen is we're going to have to listen to Mr. Gillespie again a couple of weeks. Does that mean we're going to have to bring all of the consultants back in again? I mean, you know, here's the opportunity tonight. Present your information. You've presented information in the past. Unite here has gone to the public over the last year making assertions, allegations. State them tonight. We're not going to say they're right or wrong necessarily. State them. Put them on the record.
And Mr. Gillespie, you have that opportunity to do that this evening.
Yes, no, and again, I appreciate there's a room full of people that want to get on with this.
Yes,
I
but
said
we're here
I'll
to
take
listen
you
to
up.
what you have to say, because we're not going to extend this beyond what we've got this evening. We have all the consultants here that people can address your concerns, and so please state them, and you'll have that opportunity. So do you wish to do that now, or do you want to reserve your comments till the rest of the deputations are made?
I think I'd like to reserve. Thank you, Your Worship.
Okay, thank you. The next deputation is from Mr. Fred Sacco, representing the Junior C. Okay, you're not speaking? Okay. The next presentation then would be from Mr. Paul Burns, representing the Girls Minor Hockey Association. Mr. Burns, welcome.
Sorry, I'm not Paul.
Yes, we know. Lori. And Lori, you're going to be making a presentation after Mr. Burns, is that correct?
Well, I'll go first. We're both on the same page on
And
this.
for the benefit of the record, would you please just give us your addresses?
Sure. My name is Lori Primo. I'm the past president of Stanford Skating Club. I reside at 6476 Armstrong Drive, Niagara Falls.
Thank you.
As I said, my name is Lori Primo, and I am the past president of the Stanford Skating Club and a member of the Arena Steering Committee and Arena Fundraising Committee since their inception. I have spoken before council and sent numerous emails regarding the user group's position on the need for a new arena facility, of which we are all in agreement with, the fact that we need another ice surface and need to replace Niagara Falls Arena. We as a group have spent a lot of time, about 3 years to date, working towards this goal. When we started, we certainly realized that going down this path would have a lot of ups and downs and a lot of challenges to be dealt with. What I would not believe was that we would always keep going around in a circle. And as we just heard, that seems to be the way it goes. When we seem to be taking a few steps forward, we always seem to end up back at the beginning. A lot of good things have been done, not only by our steering committee, but also by the recreational committee, towards the goal of having a new arena complex. But we really are spinning our wheels. I am hoping that after the presentations here today, we can move forward so that the user groups and community can finally see some positive measures taken to lead us towards the outcome we have all worked so hard for and that we deserve, a new facility that we can all be proud of. As we go through these presentations today, I as well have a couple of questions for the speakers to keep in mind and hope that someone will be able to answer them as we speak. I know that there have been at least 4 recreational facilities located very close to or maybe even on the SciTech property. The pool on the property, Palmer Park, the YMCA, and Niagara Regional Street Hockey. So my question is, are there any substantiated reports of any health or environmental concerns related to these facilities being so close to or even on the SciTech lands? I think this is important because I think that addresses what the concerns that Unite Here has raised of material seeping off the property and into these other sites, which I'm sure would have happened at these places. But I don't know if that is true, so I would ask that question of the professionals that are here tonight. A few members of the Stanford Skating Club board met with Unite Here this week to listen to what they had to say regarding this matter. I understand that they have contacted some groups over the last couple of weeks, just asking to speak to get their message across. We met with them on Monday. Obviously, they were looking for our support for their opposition to the land site. But as well, when we asked for specific reasons for this, none were really given. I asked the same question that I've posed here tonight about the surrounding recreational facilities, and he knew of no instances that he could refer to, but did reference some sort of explosion, construction explosion that happened at the mall across the street, but didn't know any details of the cause. So really my question is, and I really thought hard on how to phrase this, but I don't know, and maybe you can help me understand why so much weight has been given to Unite Here, which is a labor group for Canadian Niagara hotels, is taken so heavily over what all the consultants from SciTech, Gardner Lee, Cantalk, the city's consultants, and everybody else, the medical director. I just don't understand why so much weight has been given that way and not this way. And that, I guess, is my main thing. I do not have anything new to add that I have not over the last 3 years already said, but I do want to express my disappointment and the community's disappointment in the time frame and the progress that has been made to date. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Primo. Mr. Burns, would you like to come forward, please?
Hi, Paul Burns. I reside at 6470 McMillan Drive. I'm past president of Niagara Falls Girls Hockey.
Welcome.
Thank you. We did meet with Ethan Clark at one of our meetings, and basically he said the same thing as he did with all the other groups. I know girls hockey is confident in the design of the complex, being that it's not a bowl type that would be dug into the ground. You know, that usually happens in a 7,500, 9,000 seat facility. And we are confident with the consultants and the tests that have been done. And just to kind of go on to a personal note, I've been a lifelong resident in Niagara Falls, and I'm getting to that age, but I grew up and learned to swim at Cyanamid Pool. And anybody 45 years of age and higher probably learned to swim there and probably drank quite a bit of water when they learned. Now, that pool had a a baby pool, and it had a level for every swimmer, including the high diving board. And I believe there might have even been like a hot tub type thing behind the change rooms. I know a number of people that worked there all their lives and are still around to tell the story. I know a number of people that live in the area, and their basements are 7 feet below ground level, and they're still around to tell the story. And then last, again, agreeing with Lori on the time process, construction doesn't get any cheaper. And the longer we go, the more money it's going to cost. And it's all, it's a taxpayer thing. Unite Here is a group that, personally, I feel, has more to it than just the arena site going on there. There's future development that may happen, and being a union representative, you think they would want development so that their employees, their union would grow and would become stronger. So that's pretty much sums it up for me.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Burns. The next presenter is Mr. Mick Wolf, representing the Recreation Committee and the chair of the Arena Community Fundraising Campaign. Welcome, Mr. Wolf.
Thank you, Your Worship, Mr. Halsey, members of council and staff and guests. More of a statement than a presentation.
Just a point for the record, just your address, please, so we can...
6327 Stanford Green.
Thank you.
Drive, Niagara Falls.
Okay.
I'm representing tonight two key community interest groups, and in fact a third. Mr. Sacco asked me to also represent the Junior C's, of which I am the general manager, all in support of staff, its consultants, and lend our unequivocal support to the process that has selected this site and reaffirmed it in terms of its appropriateness for the city's arena's site. At last night's Recreation Committee meeting, which is comprised of more than a dozen members of the community at large, a good cross-section that serve as a lightning rod for public sentiment in this city, unanimously put forth a motion that would support the process that has taken place to date. We don't think that a lobby group should engender greater support than the highest jurisdiction relative to the Ministry of Environment in terms of their rulings on this matter. It's probably the most studied property in Ontario, maybe Canada, and we don't think that some interest group should have a higher authority on that than the duly elected people that we see here before you, that we hope will make a decision on behalf of community interest to see this project move forward. For the community fundraising group that supported this arena, there were individuals, children, businesses that all threw their financial support, knowing that this was the site and that continues to be the case, that they are comfortable seeing that it move forward here and they want to see something happen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wolf. At this time, members of council, we're going to be hearing from our CAO. He will outline the presentation of our presenters with regard to our technical information. So at this time, I'd like to call on Mr. McDonald to introduce our consultants.
Your Worship, just a couple of comments, because it's been a little bit confusing up to this point. And I just want to remind council that we're here tonight more than anything to provide information in terms of what's happened that brought us to this point. The decision on selecting this site to build the arena has already been made, and this council has already approved that, and that's not why we're here tonight. We're here tonight because after that decision was made, people have made suggestions and questioned a lot of variables related to that. And we have a report tonight that we're going to deal with in a few minutes that really reminds the council and the public the process that we went through to get here. And it was a very extensive process, as some of the speakers referred to, in terms of what the process was as to how we ended up selecting this site, the community consultation that was involved in bringing to this point, the kind of criteria we used. And it was very extensive, and it was very well participated in throughout that whole process. That decision was made and the report outlines why we made the decision, and from our point of view, it was a good decision for reasons you're going to hear about in a few minutes. But the reason we're back here tonight is because back on the 22nd of January, Unite Here showed up, and the consultants were not here. And they made suggestions about certain issues related to the site. And the council, in their wisdom, and thought that there were 3 of the councilors not here last time around. And maybe because when we had the first meeting in October, it wasn't in this chamber and it wasn't in Cogeco. But it was a public meeting, and the press was there, Unite Here was there, and the consultants were there, and we dealt with a lot of information. And the thought was tonight, let's bring it back tonight and update it. And at the same time, we can respond to some of the concerns that were brought to us on the 22nd, and that's what you're going to hear tonight. The suggestion that new information brought for the first time, I can't believe that somebody's saying that. And what you're going to hear, you're going to see presentations with minor modifications, the exact presentations that we saw in October downstairs in Committee Room 2. And the only change to that is that there's some new data that's come in. In fact, new data came in yesterday you're going to hear about. So it's the same basic core data that the public has seen. But in addition to updating the data, tonight was an opportunity to respond to the suggestions that Unite Here made. And you're going to hear that. That's new. And so one of the speakers made reference to new data and looking to respond to it. In fact, it's the other way around. We're responding to their comments that they made on January 22nd in reference to the bylaw. As we all recall, the actual transfer of the land is what Mr. Gillespie's talking about, and we did have an initial discussion on that bylaw, and the council decided to defer that and now come back at another time, and that is a legal document. But that's not what's on the table tonight. Tonight is just really to make sure everybody is comfortable with the information and that council is comfortable with the information and they get a chance to hear again from the consultants. And we're fortunate tonight, and as the clerk referred to, it's a real opportunity that we've had now on a couple of occasions where Unite Here came to council and made suggestions, and we didn't have the consultants available to respond. And that seems to be the pattern. Well, tonight they're here, and they're going to respond to the questions that were brought up in the past, and that's what we hope to do, is resolve today. What we don't want to do is finish the meeting tonight and come back in 2 weeks and have some group come in and say, well, I have a question. Well, as somebody said, we've been kind of going in circles, and hopefully that will stop tonight. We're fortunate tonight that we have several people that were key in bringing us to this point, and they're going to speak tonight and give you some idea of the extent of the work that took place to help us make the decision to select the site, and how we're getting to the point now, the final steps relative to the record of site condition. Dave Schramm from Urban Environmental Management is the project manager for the Arena Development Project, and Mr. Schramm represents the city of Niagara Falls. He, in fact, not only is involved with helping us the planning to build the facility, but because of extensive background, is also working as a peer review specialist to monitor the documents and monitor the process for us, and he's been involved from day one. Luciano Piccioni from RCI Consultants, that was a key consultant again for the city, involved with the Brownfield Community Improvement Plan. You're going to hear a little bit about what the city has done relative to brownfields. And what we're talking about here tonight is one of the largest brownfields in the city, and cities across the country are attempting to work on brownfield sites to make them employable lands and to make them useful again. And that's what this is all about. What we're trying to do through this whole process is take a brownfield site that's basically useless to us and a potential threat, to clean it up and to use it for something productive. I mean, that's what's going on here. That's what we're trying to do, and you're going to hear about that. In addition, we have Anton Merrick from SciTech, and he'll speak as well, and he's spoken to the council before and give an idea of the role of SciTech and what they've done to this place. And we also have Jeff Westerby from Garner-Lee, who's a consultant to SciTech, and Dr. Glenn Ferguson, also a consultant to SciTech, and they'll give you an idea of what they've done relative to following the guidelines of the MOE. Dr. Doug Sider is also here, Associate Medical Officer of Health, and will make a couple of comments and respond to any inquiries that we may have in that regard. Your Worship, what we'd like to do is to go through some of the presentations, and some of them may take a couple of minutes, but it's really to, again, remind council of what took place. This is a very extensive process, and hopefully give council the opportunity to ask any questions they might have and to give some comfort level to where we are today.
Good, thank you, Mr. McDonald. And at this point, I'd like to call Mr. David Tram forward, please. Mr. Tram, if you'd be kind enough to begin the process, and I think if members of council have a question, please, we'll try to identify the issues and deal with those. If you have any questions, let us know. Mr. Tram?
Thank you very much. Good to be back talking about the arena project and hopefully moving it forward. I'm going to talk this evening about process and the processes that we've followed. I think you'll hear tonight that issues such as the daycare issue, as it's been described, will be fully addressed and the facts properly presented on that. We will talk about the extensive testing. SciTech's consultants will. We'll talk about the extensive role of peer review and others as we go through. So I'd like to start pretty much at the beginning when the council decided that they wanted to replace Niagara Falls Memorial Arena. And in order to do that, we undertook a site selection process, quite similar, by the way, to the one that was undertaken for the community center, which ultimately ended up in kind of a brownfield site, and we've seen what's happened there. But this process was initiated by council on May 16th, 2005, at which time they approved the process, the evaluation criteria, the priority of the evaluation criteria, and at the same time a space and usage program, and we'll get to that a little later. But ultimately, 32 evaluation criteria were used to examine a number of sites within the city using a four-step process. And the four-step process involved the approval of the process by council on May 16th, the development of a long list, the development of a short list, and we got from a long list to a short list using a comparative evaluation of different criteria under the headings. We call them environmental criteria, where we looked at the MOE guidelines, any relevant material we had, certain of the old reports on the SciTech property and other properties that we looked at. Technical criteria, servicing, traffic issues, matters such as that. Financial criteria, the cost to develop the site, the cost to purchase the site, and the schedule. Is the site available? What's the approvals process? These kinds of things. And the final step was to identify the preferred site. We looked at 8 potential sites. 5 of these sites were what we described as city-owned sites, and 3 were offered by private interests, private-owned land. And we again comparatively evaluated this and identified 4 shortlist sites, or 3 shortlist sites, I should say. 4 shortlist sites. And they included the property across from the Old Mountain Road landfill, the Mewburn Road site, the McLeod Montrose site, which is now being which has been sold and is now being excavated and cleaned up for new development. The community center site, which is a good site, but ultimately turned out to be too small for what council wanted to see in terms of the ultimate development of the arena project, and what we called the SciTech site. And as you know, we came back to council and with a recommendation for the SciTech site. But it wasn't my recommendation, it wasn't city staff's recommendation. A number of people were involved in that, and it was a public process that involved the steering committee. The steering committee that's made up of city staff, it's made up of the user groups, and has a representative from council and myself. And we went through these steps together. We brought technical information, city staff did a number of detailed evaluations, and we brought a pretty comprehensive report back to council. We also had a public open house where we talked about the arena project, we talked about the site selection process, and a lot of input was received through that process between May 2005 and November 7th when we came back to council. We provided 2 reports to council that evening that are in your council package tonight, and recommended approval, subject to an agreement being produced, a record of site condition acknowledged by the Ministry of the Environment being done, and that the city would also undertake their own site-specific investigations and peer review. conditions. And that has been done, including geotechnical work on the site, and that the schedule will be revised to reflect the time that it would take to develop the site. As I said, that was approved in November of 2005, and we proceeded then to do a number of things, including hiring architects and starting with the design and what have you. But when we met and presented this to council in November, we gave a number of reasons why this site was the preferred site. And as I mentioned, it's a comparative evaluation process, one site against the other. And when it was all said and done, this site, in everybody's opinion that were involved in it, best met the approved site selection test, the approved by council site selection test. It was also a priority site in your brownfield community improvement plan. And Mr. Ficcione will talk about that. And that process was approved by council later on February 6, 2006, but it had already been identified at that point. The development of this site, you'll hear more in the next presentation about this, but it's supported by city, regional, and provincial policies. It's a smart growth development. This is a redevelopment of a brownfield site in the center of our city. It's also an important initiative, and this was a criteria that this council approved and we applied. An important initiative to rehabilitate this property and reuse the site for community uses. And the same rationale that we use for the community center site. As a result of this, the region has decided that they want to improve the intersection at Pearlstone Road and Stanley Avenue, and also extend Pearlstone Road to Services Arena. That's a huge development that'll take place because of this development here. And there's also municipal green funds available for site investigation or remediation that will be talked about in more detail by Luge. The other reasons, there have been a number, and we'll get into this in subsequent presentations, but independent and comprehensive environmental investigations. These have been comprehensive. They have met all the tests of the provincial regulation, site-specific risk assessment, and they've all come to the same conclusion. This site is suitable. It poses no risks to human health or ecology. It's suitable for the proposed use. The site is offered at no cost to the city. Perhaps it's not the most important reason when it comes to environmental health, but it is an important reason. This site is large enough if council decided to expand in the future or expand soon to house a fourplex with on-site parking. And it is a permitted use. There has been some discussion over the last week with user groups that, this could go to the Ontario Municipal Court. Well, there is no process to go to the Ontario Municipal Court. It is permitted. There are no amendments to the official plan. There's only bylaw required to develop this site. So we think it's a good site for the proposed arena complex. What are we proposing? Well, first of all, we took our guidance from what was approved on November 7, 2005 by Council, the Space and Usage Program that's included in the discussion paper that was presented to Council back in May and ultimately approved. And that Space and Usage Program was very specific: a fourplex arena complex and parking and site servicing. That's it. What was not requested? This has never been requested. This is never part of council's direction to the team. A children's daycare center, parks, soccer fields. None of that has ever been part of this proposal for approval. And again, you'll get more information from Dr. Ferguson when he talks about what he looked at in developing the risk assessment. Consultation activities. I mentioned that a lot of consultation was done in the site selection process. We've done a lot of consultation since. The Arena Development Steering Committee, as I mentioned, the membership of that, they've been actively involved. We've had several meetings to go over a number of things from after the site selection now into the design. We've had, since this project started, over 70 contacts with user groups, interested citizens, government agencies, the Ministry of Environment, Ontario Hydro, the region. So a lot of work has been done in terms of confirming information, getting new information, and finding out what the community wants out here. As I mentioned, we had the public open house in June. We identified that we had a project newsletter that's been posted on the city website that was available, was a bestseller at the library in City Hall, McBain Center, and it identified the site selection process. It talked about the architect that's been hired, Mr. Denny Bryan, who's here tonight, if we have any questions about the architecture. So we've been open. We've had a process that we've tried to get everybody involved and get their opinion. Mick Wolf, he's headed through Parks and Rec, the fundraising committee, and they did a marvelous job for a couple months in the seat sale and getting donations, and they stopped their activities, as council knows, when the OHL things came along. They're kicking to get back at it, but great community support from the fundraising committee. And that's what we found since we've started this project. The community wants an arena, and this site is suitable for that, and the community has accepted it. There's also been an extensive consultation activity as part of the community improvement plan, and you'll hear a little bit more about that. I'm just going to get dry talking too much here. I'd like to talk a little bit, about what's called the RSC process, the Record of Site Condition process. You've heard that term thrown around a few times already tonight, and the Brownfield Statute Law Amendment Act. And these are the regulations that have guided this process. And I'm not going to try to bore you through all of this detail, but it's important to know that, this act, which took 25, 30 years to develop and become what it was in 2001, it's a process that's followed throughout the United States, the Environmental Protection Agency, other provinces in Canada. This process that SciTech followed and that we support is a process that's proven, that's acceptable, and comes to conclusions that are right. And others have used it. That's the test, and the test is it's comprehensive. It's a regulation of the Environmental Protection Act, and it's a mandatory process up to October 1st, 2005, just about the same time council approved this site. It wasn't mandatory. It is mandatory now, and many of the things that have been done over the last 18 months as part of this process have been posted on Environmental Bill of Rights registry. Public have been involved in that. But it requires experts to do this work, and this what's called a qualified person. And the credentials and requirements of a qualified person are clearly stated in this regulation. In this case, Dr. Ferguson is our qualified person that undertook this work and signed off in terms of his expertise that what was done was correct and followed the process, and the results were what they were. The Record of Site Condition is actually the product at the end of all this process. It's our next step, and it really is Dr. Ferguson's statement that he followed this process, and the process to determine that this proposed arena use meets all the soil and groundwater standards. And that's the next step, and that will be done following, since we've got went over the last hurdle last evening. But fundamental to the Record of Site Condition is the risk assessment, and you'll hear Dr. Ferguson tonight talk about a site-specific risk assessment that was undertaken on this 15-acre property. And really what that does is assesses what are the potential risks to human health and ecological receptors. And they use a wide range of scenarios, and he'll talk about those scenarios and how he develops those scenarios and why he uses them. And he tests them against some very wide-ranging and comprehensive site-specific contaminant standards, and he'll get into that as well. But they're all based on regulation, and they're all as a result of consultation with the ministry and with others that are involved in this. This risk assessment process has been ongoing for many, many years. Since 1985, they've been testing the soil, groundwater, surface water at that site. The plant closed in 1992, and they decommissioned the plant in 93, and there has been site remediation ongoing 93, 96, and 2006, and we talked about that both in some responses that were prepared in response to Unite Here and at the last meeting in October. But one response that was produced, and a copy is in your handout tonight, and we talked about it, was the allegation that there was coal tar on the site. That in fact was not true. It was cleaned up in 93 and 96 to the satisfaction of the ministry, and further tests have indicated that there are no presence of contamination. In 2006, there were, as part of the consultation that we were doing with the city, there were slightly elevated levels of arsenic, and we asked that they be removed, even though they would meet the test. We still felt that it was important that this site be totally clean, and that was done, and that was done at Sitec's cost. And again, they tested after it was done and found the soil was replaced with clean soil, found that they had done the work. The risk assessment process began with what's called a risk assessment pre-submission form. Way back in November 2005, immediately after this council approved the site, this is a preferred site, Sitec kicked into gear. They knew that we were in a hurry, and they started this process right off the bat. That's submitted to the ministry and it has to be accepted, and it was. The next step there was they undertook as I mentioned, a comprehensive human health and ecological site-specific risk assessment. That took us several months to do. It was finally accepted by the Director of the Ministry of Environment on October 13th, 2006.
Mr. Schramm, if I'd like to interrupt you at this point, there's a question from one of the councillors.
Yes.
Councillor Ioannoni?
Thank you. Through to Mr. Schramm. Mr. Schramm, Mr. Cushman, in my notes, made a comment that cyanides and ammonias were not on the list of risk. And my point tonight is to make sure that all the questions are answered.
Absolutely.
Where does that sit in there?
Dr. Ferguson will deal with that very directly.
Okay, thank you.
And he will take you through many of these issues. The thallium and lead issue, that was identified, I guess, on January 22nd as something that was not studied. In fact, you'll find from Dr. Ferguson that it was studied and it was tested for, and it wasn't present. So, levels that are over the standard. So, a lot of what I'm doing is introducing the steps that Sitec took. Dr. Ferguson will go through each of these in terms of what the extent of what they looked at, and you'll get I think a real appreciation of how comprehensive this work is, and that it was built on work not but just undertaken from November to October, but work that's been undertaken since 1985. The certificate of property use was issued by the ministry, the director, on January 2007. We hoped at that time to move forward, but a leave of appeal was requested for the certificate of property use. As of last night, we found out around 4:30, 20 after 4, but that was not granted by the Environmental Review Tribunal. So that was April 10th, last night. And I think a comprehensive decision, 25 pages, was released this morning, and I think it effectively says that what was done there was correct, and any issues that were raised in that leave to appeal have been adequately addressed in the risk assessment. And the record of site condition is the next step, and that's a step that, compared to the other steps, is a formality of sorts. We anticipate that to be done in April or later than May of this year, and the final step is for it to be acknowledged by the ministry, and I'm confident that that can happen once it's submitted by Sitec. I bring this slide up because there was a lot of questions in early days in terms of concerns about the process of what the MOE did in this process. Were they really hands-on? Did they really have something to say? Did they really have to approve things? The MOE is very heavily involved in the record of site condition process. They have a real responsibility in terms of approval and consultation, and quite frankly, if you don't satisfy them at each step, then you go back and start again, or start in terms of where they have issues. And we've seen that all the way through this process, and for that matter, in other record of site condition processes that we've been involved in. But, they ask questions, and they have their own technical experts, and they often bring in outside technical experts, and they do their homework on this, and they make sure that this work is done correctly. In terms of this process, pre-consultation, I know that SciTech has been involved in discussing this site and different remedial action plans and different processes, since '85 and since regularly since the '90s. So they've been quite involved in this site and know quite a bit about it. They reviewed and commented on the pre-submission consultation form, which identifies the approach to this project and the scope. They had expert review on the risk assessment. Their MOE team includes experts in geoscience and hydrogeology, human health toxicology, ecological toxicology, and risk management. And quite often, as I mentioned, they bring independent consultants in, and I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case here as well. They then approve, or not, the property-specific standards. These are the chemical parameters and the levels of chemical parameters that one can meet on a property. And these were developed by Dr. Ferguson and his team. And in this case, they approved these property site-specific standards. They accept or reject the site-specific risk assessment. As I've mentioned, they approved it. They issue a draft and final certificate of property use, and they post those on the EBR registry for public comment. And they did receive public comments on that. And as we know, there was a request for a leave to appeal. They also acknowledge the record of site condition. And as I mentioned, all their decisions are posted. So it's a public process, it's a transparent process, and the MOE is very, very actively involved in it. The question was brought up, and I've addressed it a few times, but I think it's important. Can the record of site condition be audited by the ministry? And the concern here is that, I may stand up here and say, in my opinion, and others will say this, the process is complete. The next step is not a difficult process. But, there is always the possibility that these things can be audited by the ministry. This is part of the regulation. But, there's a test for these things to be audited, and I don't think that test exists here. The record of site condition would contain false or misleading information. I don't anticipate that it will. In fact, I'm sure it won't. The contamination from the property is moved off-site. That's not the case, and we'll find out that from Jeff Westerby of Gardner Lee that the contamination, there is no contamination here, and no contamination will move on to this site. But the property is used for a more sensitive use than that proposed in the RFC. As I mentioned, we proposed to put an arena on this site, nothing else, an arena and parking. Arena for skating and for some activities, nothing else. So we won't use it for a more sensitive use. A condition of the certificate of property use is contravened. We know what the conditions are. When the record of site condition is acknowledged by the ministry and this site is transferred to the city, it'll be their responsibility to satisfy these conditions, and I'm quite sure that the city will do that. New contamination is identified. We don't expect that to happen at all. The studies that have been done at this site are incredibly comprehensive. In summary, and I will talk later on after all the presentations are made about the peer review role that's been taken here and the independence. But in summary, at this point, and subject to and following for the other presentations, there have been comprehensive regulations and standards that have been followed to do this site-specific risk assessment. They must be followed. It's mandatory. The MOE has been independent and rigorous in their peer review and approvals. We've spent more time talking to them, and SciTech and their consultants have spent days and hours talking to them and getting their input and answering further questions. We believe SciTech has diligently and completely followed the process and met the provincial test. And the proof of that pudding is that they've received the approvals and the leave of appeal was not granted. MOE approved the risk assessment, issued the certificate of property use, and is expecting, and that last night I spoke to the ministry, is expecting to receive the record of site conditions so they can move on with something else. And when it really comes down to it, there are no other processes to follow. This is the process. It's mandated by legislation. SciTech followed it, and it's been a long 18 months, but I think we've seen the light at the end of the tunnel, and it's hopefully a green light from here. Next, Luke Pachone is going to talk next about the CIP process, and then we'll follow there with Jeff Westerby and Dr. Ferguson on the risk assessment.
Thank you, Mr. Tran. Mr. Piccioni, do you want to come forward, please, and welcome?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. I'm pleased to be before Council again. I've been here quite often over the last couple of years. As I'm sure most of you know, and for the new councilors and returning councilors, my name is Luciano Piccioni. I'm president of RCI Consulting. We have prepared 3 community improvement plans for the city of Niagara Falls, including the Brownfield Community Improvement Plan, which I'll be speaking about this evening, the Downtown Community Improvement Plan, and just recently adopted and approved the historic Drummondville Community Improvement Plan for the area, also known as Main and Ferry. Now, what I want to focus on today, there we go, is I'm going to talk very briefly about the Brownfields Community Improvement Plan, which I have right here. We'll talk about the Federation of Canadian Municipalities Green Municipal Fund Loan, which applies to the SciTech property, and we'll talk about the role that the arena played in obtaining that loan. We'll talk about how the arena can act as a catalyst for brownfield redevelopment of not just the SciTech lands, but of the pilot project area within which the SciTech lands are found. And furthermore, the Silvertown neighborhood and the downtown. We'll talk very briefly about some municipal practices with respect to taking on risk-assessed lands, taking possession of risk-assessed lands, and then conclude. So the Brownfield Community Improvement Plan was adopted by Council on March 23rd of last year, and it was approved by the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing on July 17th of last year. This plan, as Dave noted, was prepared using an extensive public participation process. We had 3 separate public meetings in the development of this plan. That included a public open house in 2005. We had a formal public meeting under the Planning Act in March of 2006, and we had an initial public meeting at the beginning of that process. And what we heard during those meetings was that the SciTech lands, something has to be done about them. They are, and the area within which they are, is the #1 priority area for brownfield redevelopment in this city. We did 2 sets of interviews at separate times with key stakeholders, and this included some property owners within the pilot project area, and I'll define that area momentarily. We did interviews with brownfield developers, support professionals such as environmental consultants, real estate professionals, planning, and so on. And again, this area came up as the #1 priority. We conducted numerous update presentations to staff and council, meetings with staff. This was a very comprehensive community improvement plan. What we learned through all of these interviews and public consultation is that there are a number of impediments to brownfield redevelopment in the city of Niagara Falls. I don't want to go through all of these. Some of them, obviously, things like the cost of environmental studies and remediation, the cost of demolishing obsolete buildings and upgrading infrastructure, and so on. What was stressed by the participants at our public meetings and the key stakeholders that we interviewed was that, we needed some sort of incentive programs that work for small and large developments. We needed these programs to promote smart growth. We needed to raise awareness and knowledge of brownfields among developers and the general public, to demystify brownfields, to remove some of the stigma and the misconception around brownfields. As a matter of fact, when we first started this process, we developed a brochure that was handed out at the first public meeting, and it answered questions like, how do we know a site is safe for proposed use? What is a risk assessment? Okay, what is the city doing to promote brownfield redevelopment? So here we are a couple years down the road answering those same questions. But one of the most important things
that we heard in this consultation over and over again was that we need more support and participation from the city through leadership and partnerships on brownfield redevelopment. Why will investors, or why should developers put their hard-earned money into an area such as SciTech, okay, into that area, if the city won't? So show us some leadership. That's what we heard. And certainly, putting an arena there, and an arena of this scale, and as we heard from Dave Schramm, it went through a competitive process. A lot of other sites were examined. By putting that arena there, that shows leadership. Now, the Brownfield Community Improvement Plan is not just a plan. There were a number of background reports that were produced. We did a background report on community improvement, and what we found there is that the city's official plan policies, economic development policies, the region's official plan policies and smart growth policies, and provincial policies in play all support brownfield redevelopment and certainly support the redevelopment of the SciTech lands. We looked at brownfield best practices in other municipalities to determine what could be used here in Niagara Falls. We recommended revised official plan policies and an environmental due diligence procedure for the environmental plan review of planning applications, and those have now been adopted. Those are state-of-the-art policies. Okay, they are as good, if not better, than any other municipality in Ontario is using. And we did 2 reports on the pilot project area, looking at land use, infrastructure, summary of environmental conditions, and so on. So we studied that area quite comprehensively. We developed 4 financial incentive programs to be used by the city. Plan's been adopted. These are now in place. But what we did was we varied the level of incentives based on need, and we identified 3 areas of need. And the top area of need was the pilot project area, within which the SciTech lands lie. So what we tried to do was let the incentive programs reflect what we were hearing from the stakeholders and the public. So you get the biggest bang for the buck as far as these 4 incentive programs are concerned, if you're in the pilot project area. Okay, and the pilot project area is about 355 acres in size. There are about 144 properties in that area, and there are over 200 acres of developable land in that area. And here you see the area, basically the boundary, you can see it here, and the largest properties, of course, are the SciTech lands and the former CN Rail lands over here. SciTech at 93 acres, the former CN Rail lands at approximately 40 acres. So these are the 2 biggest properties in this area, and we are now in the process of conducting some very detailed planning studies on these areas. And in fact, we had a public meeting about 2 months ago, and this is the land use concept that we've developed for the SciTech lands. And what you see here is that basically everything in red is service commercial, office, and light industrial. But you'll note that the arena complex really is the focal point of the southern portion of the redevelopment of this site. It will be, and is, the catalyst for what is going to happen on the rest of that site. So in the Brownfield Community Improvement Plan, we specified a municipal leadership strategy. We detailed that. And what that means, the purpose of that strategy is for the city, as I said earlier, to demonstrate leadership on brownfield redevelopment projects. What does that mean? That means that the city would undertake brownfield redevelopment projects on municipally owned properties and try to do things like showcase innovative remediation approaches and technologies. Using a risk assessment is showcasing an innovative remediation approach. Okay? If you can't clean the whole site to generic full-depth standards, the alternative is a risk assessment. And you've already heard what that means, and you'll hear more about what that means with respect to the arena. It also, a municipal leadership strategy also means the city actively participating in public and private partnerships to remediate and redevelop publicly and privately held lands. Issuing requests for proposals on brownfield tax sale properties. These are all the things that a city has to do if it wants to be proactive, if it wants to promote brownfield redevelopment. And I can tell you, I've looked at what a lot of cities in Canada and the United States have done, and the successful ones are always the ones that do these things. They're the ones that show leadership, that are proactive. Okay? And again, what we heard was that the pilot project area was the area most in need, and it's an excellent location, frankly, for the city to demonstrate leadership on brownfields via a catalyst project, and your catalyst project is the arena. What will that do? Well, it'll signal to the development community the investment community, businesses and residents, that the city believes in the future of that area, and that the city is willing to spend up to $18 million on a new public facility on a brownfield site. That's a pretty clear signal of confidence. Now, let's talk a little bit about the FCM Green Municipal Fund application. This is a fund that has $20 million, it has $150 million in it, but $20 million is led every year by FCM. The first year was the year that we applied, and $20 million was led. And the city retained myself to work with them and to work with the developer to apply for a $1.9 million low-interest rate loan from FCM for the remediation and the risk management of the SciTech property. And we were successful in obtaining that loan. It represented 10% of all the money that was handed out for that particular purpose across the country that year. It was the biggest loan in that particular year. We were very pleased. It took a lot of hard work under exceeding time constraints, but we were very pleased to get that. Now, the way this will work is that the loan, when it is required, will be forwarded to the municipality in parts. It doesn't come all at once. As the risk management activities on the site take place and have to be paid for, that loan will be forwarded to the municipality. The municipality will then, because it can, through the Brownfield Community Improvement Plan, provide those monies to the developer as a grant to pay for remediation and risk management activities. And then what happens is, as development takes place and the property taxes increase on that site, rather than give those property taxes back to the developer as a grant, as would be specified normally in the Brownfield Community Improvement Plan, the city will collect those taxes and will send them back to FCM to pay off this loan. Okay, and it's a 20-year term loan, and it's a non-recourse loan. So it's a pretty good deal for the city. It's a pretty good deal for the developer. It's a win-win situation all the way around. In fact, the region has committed to also kick in their portion of the tax increase. So that is another way that the city is leveraging not only FCM dollars, which are federal dollars, but regional dollars. So let's talk a little bit about the arena as a catalyst. We've already gone through this. In this location, and let's look at this from a brownfield perspective and from a investment and catalyst perspective. In this location, an arena is not just an arena. Okay? In this location, this arena will act, I'm confident it will act as a major catalyst for redevelopment of the rest of the SciTech lands, including spin-off commercial uses, the pilot project area as a whole, and the downtown. Why do I say that? Because I've seen this time and time again in communities that have been successful in redeveloping brownfield projects. It can be an arena, it can be a park, it can be a city hall, it can be a skating rink. But there's always an investment on the part of the municipality, and it's usually up front, and it usually kickstarts this type of catalyst process. Okay? The associated economic and social benefits, the decision to locate this arena on the SciTech lands was a key reason that FCM approved this application. As the person who helped FCM develop this program, as an FCM peer reviewer, I can tell you that if FCM catches wind that the arena is not going to be on this site, it's very likely they'll cancel the loan. Because that was a major component of the city demonstrating to FCM that they wanted to exhibit leadership on brownfield development, and they were confident in putting this arena on these lands, and that these lands were safe for that proposed use. Okay, so again, if that were to happen, an opportunity to leverage significant funding from federal and regional levels of government will be lost. I want to talk just for a moment about economic benefits. You've heard a lot of scientific material tonight. You will hear more about environmental. Let's talk a little bit about economic benefits in general, okay? And of course, there are studies to back all of this up. For every dollar that's spent on brownfield redevelopment, that creates $3.80 in economic output in the Canadian economy. This was a study that I did with a professor from the University of Toronto back in 2002 for the National Roundtable on Environment and Economy. That was and still is the highest multiplier, and this fellow's been doing input-output models for 15 years. That's the highest economic multiplier we've seen in any economic sector in the Canadian economy. Okay? And what that means is that there will be additional spending in the local economy in Niagara Falls because of that site being cleaned up and an arena being put on it. The value of brownfield properties surrounding brownfield sites, or the value of properties, that surround brownfield sites that are redeveloped can increase by an average of 10%, all the way up to 2.5 kilometers away. And the closer you are to the brownfield site that's being cleaned up, the more that average value will increase. So now we're starting to talk about, well, where will property values increase? They'll increase adjacent to the SciTech site, they'll increase in the pilot project area, all the way to Silvertown neighborhood and even the downtown. So you start to see the catalyst impact of this development. Just to give you an example, in 1994, in the city of Hamilton, a former 40-acre brownfield site landfill, and I'll talk a little bit about it later, on Hamilton's West Harborfront, and you're probably familiar with this, it's Harborfront Park in Hamilton, was redeveloped using a risk assessment, okay? Basically, the site was capped, and when Environment Canada looked at property values in 1998, what they found was that there was a significant increase in average house prices in the area surrounding this park. They looked at that area compared to a control group, and what they found was the area around the park, average house prices went up 115% versus 33%. So you can really start to see the catalytic power here from an economic perspective of brownfield redevelopment. Let's drill it down a little closer. Let's look at the SciTech property. Now, these figures were generated for the proposal that we put into FCM. We used conservative numbers, and we estimated the redevelopment cost, or the developer estimated the redevelopment cost, including the remediation, risk management, and construction for the whole SciTech site at $90 million. So you have a $18 million arena construction project leveraging about $70 million in private sector investment. What's going to happen? The assessed value of those SciTech lands, if they're redeveloped, they will increase from less than currently $1 million, if you can believe it, on 93 acres, to between $19 million and $106 million 10 years from now. Property taxes, and this is just the municipal share of property taxes on the SciTech lands. Again, right now, 93 acres, generating 10 years from now. Just in the remediation and risk management, just that component is going to generate 22 full-time equivalent jobs for 3 years. The construction activity that will take place on this site, including the arena, will generate approximately 267 full-time equivalent jobs for 9 years. And overall, and this is a conservative estimate, we're estimating 700 new jobs on the SciTech site once it's redeveloped. Let's step back a little bit. What does it mean for the pilot project area? And again, these figures come out of the pilot project area study. The current total assessed value of all developable properties in the pilot project area is about $41.6 million. And this is a very conservative estimate. The assessed value of developable properties that build out of that area will be over $200 million. Current total property taxes, that includes regional, city, and provincial, are just over $1 million a year. At build out, over $10 million per year. An estimated new employment for that entire area, somewhere between 2,900 and 4,500 jobs. I think you get the picture. It's an economic benefit, it's a social benefit, and an environmental benefit. So, just want to talk briefly about municipal practices around risk-assessed lands. I was the brownfield coordinator for the city of Hamilton for 5 years. I'm very familiar with Hamilton, and so I can give you some examples from Hamilton where, in fact, the city did accept ownership and responsibility for risk-assessed lands, where they actually risk-assessed the land themselves and developed them for recreational purposes. I mentioned Bayfront Park, which is a former 40-acre landfill, was contaminated with metals and hydrocarbons. It was risk-assessed. That park opened in 1994. It's a fantastic place. No problems today. The Plastomet Park, many of you are probably familiar with the Plastomet fire that took place in 1997. It burned for 4 days. A lot of people don't know is that before that fire in a building that had been crammed full of plastics was that site was used for many years as a metal smelting facility, contaminated with heavy metals, PCBs, and oils. Again, the hotspots were removed and a risk assessment was conducted on the site, and the site's original, or the building's original concrete floor slab was left in place as a barrier as part of that risk assessment. Jackie Washington Park in Hamilton is a former CN rail site. Again, risk assessment. Heritage Green Sports Park, former landfill. Again, risk assessment. What about some other examples? Well, right now, the town of Collingwood, there's a proposal there to build 600 units of residential development on the former Canada Steamship Lines shipping yard. and the developer there is Fram. Now, what's going to happen here in the proposal, and there's an agreement in place already for this, is that contaminated soils would be scraped off the actual site where the housing will be developed, placed in a berm. That berm will be capped using a risk assessment, and those lands will be deeded to the town to be used as a park. And the town will take ownership of those lands and will also take on liability for those lands. In Toronto, the Ontario Realty Corporation is conducting a risk assessment on the West Don lands. Once that's approved, those lands will be transferred to the city for use as a park. And many, many municipalities have accepted risk assessments for things like roadway dedications. So what's before you with respect to the arena and the SciTech lands is not uncommon. It's quite common. And there are a lot of municipalities who are doing this in Ontario. So what is at stake, or stake, or you want to look at it? What's to lose here? Well, if for some reason that arena is not put on that site, you're going to lose significant employment and income generation opportunities. Potentially, increased property tax revenues in the long run, once that loan is repaid. You'll lose the opportunity to reuse existing infrastructure. If that arena is put on a greenfield site, you'll have to pay for the extension of roads, sewer, and water. That arena is located in a very good location with respect to proximity to user groups and users. That means reduced travel costs to use the arena. It means reduced air emissions and energy consumption. I could go on, but I know time is short, so certainly the catalyst that this arena will have on that area, you're going to see an improved urban aesthetic and an improved physical environment. Improved recreational opportunities and quality of life. This goes without saying. Again, what will the city lose if it doesn't do this? Well, finally, the catalytic revitalization effect of the arena project for the rest of the SciTech land. Again, it's important not to look at this just as an arena. This project is going to kickstart a lot of other projects in the pilot project area, in the downtown, and in the Silvertown neighborhood. So, in conclusion, constructing an arena on a former brownfield site in an urban core location is really an excellent example of smart growth and leadership on the part of the city of Niagara Falls. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Piccioni. Exciting news.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, Councilor Ioannoni?
can we have a copy of his presentation?
Yes, Mr. Piccioni, have you got a copy of that PowerPoint?
Unfortunately, it's got scribbling all over it, but it is here, and it can be printed out.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we can have the clerk produce that, Councilor, if you wish.
I'd like the copy, thank you.
Okay. Welcome.
Good evening, Mayor Salsi, members of the City Council and staff. My name is Tony Marek. I'm Director of Remediation for SciTech Industries. We welcome the opportunity this evening to come before City Council and present the facts on the SciTech property, in particular the 16 acres of land to be donated to the city for the hockey arena. With me this evening for our team is Ken Milo, who is the Environmental Manager for SciTech Canada, Jeff Westerby, a professional engineer and hydrogeologist with Gartner Lee Limited. Jeff has managed all of the site investigation activities at the site for many years, and in particular the investigation work that was associated with the risk assessment. This evening he will provide you with an overview of the investigation and the assessment effort for the soils and groundwater, as well as the remediation work that was conducted on the site, the 16-acre site, for the arena in August and September of 2006. Also with us this evening is Dr. Glenn Ferguson, who is a toxicologist with Cantox Environmental. His company is now known as Intrinsic Environmental. Perhaps this project has gone on so long that he's found need to change the name of his company, but they've done that, but it's still the same fine staff. Glenn and his staff, along with the support of Gartner Lee, conducted the risk assessment and prepared the risk assessment report that was submitted to the MOE and ultimately approved. This evening he will provide an overview of that risk assessment, and in particular the risk assessment for the 16 acres. And he will address several of the questions that have been raised since our last presentation in October. Just a little bit of overview of the status of the risk assessment and the certificate of property use. The original risk assessment we put together covered the entire south portion of the property. That was submitted to the MOE in March of 2006, and they rejected that. And the reason they rejected it because we could not provide a complete build-out for all of the property, and the property beyond the 16 acres that the city was looking for. We then went back and focused on the 16 acres for the arena. That report was rewritten and submitted on May of 2006. There were comments issued by the MOE on that risk assessment. We responded to them in August of 2006. The notice of the director's decision to accept the risk assessment came on October 13th of 2006. Following that, the MOE issued a draft certificate of property use, which was on October the 17th. The final certificate of property use was issued in January of 2007, following I believe it was a 30-day comment period. An application for leave to appeal was filed by Mr. Cushman to the Environmental Review Tribunal in January of 2007. And yesterday afternoon, the Review Tribunal issued its position, and it denied that leave. The next step is for us to prepare and file a record of site condition for the property. I believe at this point, though, it is important for all of you to understand the process and the supporting work that has gone into preparing the risk assessment, and to feel comfortable with the level of effort and the findings on this report. Although the approved risk assessment only covers the 16 acres to be donated to the city, I want to assure council members that an extensive investigation has already been conducted on the entire 93 acres that SciTech owns in that area. This slide shows the site with all the investigation points on all of the 93 acres. All the red, green, black, and pink dots represent sampling locations. They're either boreholes, they're wells that were installed, or soil samples. Over the past 4 years, we've installed about 150 soil borings and collected about 86 groundwater samples from monitoring wells, soil sampling boreholes, test pits, and a series of existing groundwater monitoring wells that are located throughout the site. We have conducted over 42,000 soil and groundwater parameter analyses for metals, including heavy metals, organic compounds, inorganic compounds. Of this data set, approximately 4,200, and actually I think it's closer to 4,400, soil and groundwater parameter analyses for those same compounds were conducted on the arena parcel. All this work was conducted in accordance with the MOE's rules and regulations and analyzed by an independent certified laboratory. I would now like to turn the meeting over to Jeff Westerby. Jeff will provide you with an overview of the sampling and analyses and the soil and groundwater assessments, and following that, Dr. Ferguson will talk about the risk assessment process. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you, Doctor.
Let me go back to that previous slide for a minute.
Have to take it back.
Okay. That's what I thought.
For some reason, it's going back. I want to end that.
Yeah, we'll do it. Okay. That's all right.
You can do it here.
How do we get rid of the old icon there?
There you go.
Okay. As Tony said, we've done numerous investigations of the property going back over back to 1985. The first investigation started, and they've been done in phases so that as each set of data is developed, there's areas identified where we need additional information, and it's been a gradual process of filling in over the years. And we've done a more concentrated assessment of each of the 3 sections of the property over the last 4 or 5 years. And if you just look at this map, just to give you an idea of the areas we're talking about. First of all, SciTech's property is basically 2 elongated wedges of land, roughly like that, separated by the power transmission corridor. SciTech doesn't own or control this land here. That's where the major power towers are located. So for the purposes of the investigations that have been done in the last few years, we divided the property basically into what we call the northern portion up here, the central portion, and the southern portion. And the southern portion is the one of greatest interest, as that includes the arena property, which is outlined approximately
sorry, I'm going to blind you there, by that green line there. So each of these areas was investigated in phases, and we did the southern property, which includes the arena area, most recently in 2005. So, just to recap, the northern area is where typically there's only storage of raw materials there. There were rail sidings, stockpiles from the raw materials that were used in the plant. There was no processing or manufacturing conducted in that area. And it was predominantly materials like limestone and coal and coke that were stored in that area. The central portion of the property includes a couple of old process waste landfill areas, the cooling pond, the swimming pool that was mentioned a few times earlier tonight, and an area where various waste processing had been conducted. And it's worthwhile mentioning the landfills and the waste management areas, because there's been concern raised that the area that's being proposed for the arena may contain various process waste and materials that have been disposed of over the years. But through the various phases of investigations that we've done, we've very clearly identified the areas where these materials have been deposited. We've done a lot of investigations to delineate them, and we're quite confident that none of these process wastes and materials are on the area that's being proposed for the arena property. And one of the other things that's associated with that is you'll see in one of the slides later on that something in the order of at least 50% of the area of the arena property is former manufacturing buildings. They're very thick floor slabs, concrete reinforced floor slabs, and there would be no materials that would have been deposited obviously under those, since the buildings were constructed in the early 1900s. And there's only limited space around them, so we know there's no deposits, and that's been confirmed by studies including done by ourselves and others. So we're quite confident at that point. The southern area, which I said was the one done most recently, we did those investigations in 2005, and that's the area that was covered, that includes the proposed arena area. And in each of these phases of the investigations, we've done extensive soil and groundwater sampling. There's been drilling done many locations. There's been sediment sampling collected in areas where there's open water standing. There was a comprehensive ecological inventory of the entire SciTech property and some of the adjacent lands done to show that the proposed development wouldn't be endangering any rare habitats. And I think quite importantly, the last point there is that all these investigations and studies that have been done in accordance with initially the 1996 MOE guideline for use of contaminated sites in Ontario, and more recently since October 2004, according to Ontario Regulation 15304. And this lays out very specific protocols and requirements, lays out parameters to be analyzed, who can do the work, and basically that's the guidebook for anybody doing these types of investigations in the province, and these regulations were all followed during the conduct of this work. The other thing that I think is relevant here is that there's been a couple of comments earlier tonight about the Ministry of Environment being involved through the process, and they've certainly been very involved in all our activities at the site. Each time we've got into one of the new areas of investigation, we've typically had a meeting with the Ministry, we've told them what we're proposing to do. When every stage of the investigation was completed, we'd have a review meeting with them, we'd summarize for them what we found in each of the areas. If there are any questions or points they wanted to see addressed, we would address them. They've been out to the site several times to observe the activities that are going on. So it's not something that's being done in isolation from the Ministry. They've had a very hands-on involvement through the entire process. This is just a slightly different perspective of the site. It's an air photo. But again, you can sort of get some idea with respect to the river, the properties that we're talking about on the east side of the SciTech property, on the west side, and then the arena property is down in this corner here, tucked in adjacent to the power corridor. So for the entire SciTech property, since the year 2000, we've done soil sampling at something like 154 locations, collected about 300 soil samples for full chemical analysis. It hasn't been just sporadic analyses. We've analyzed them for a very broad range of parameters. As Tony said, full range of inorganics, metals, volatiles, semi-volatiles, petroleum hydrocarbons, and so on. And there's been something in the order of 30,000 individual chemical analyses done on those soil samples. and the statistics for groundwater below, we've got about 86 groundwater monitoring wells on the SciTech lands. In the last few years, we've collected about 120 samples for analysis and conducted about 12,000 individual analyses on those samples. Now, we also have a number of other monitoring wells that are of significance, because as I'll talk about in a minute, we've done some groundwater modeling, and we've actually got wells installed slightly beyond the SciTech property. So we've not just looked at the SciTech property itself, but there's some to the north and some on the adjacent lands and some on the power transmission corridor that have been used as input for that modeling work. An important part of the overall site assessment was a detailed ecological inventory of the property, and that became significantly more important a few years ago. Up until probably 4 or 5 years ago, the ecological components of risk assessments tend to be given pretty short look. But now, since the new regulation came in 2004, the ecological component is given an equal weight by the ministry as the human health risk component or risk assessment. So it was important that we have a clear understanding of all the ecological components, what was living on the property, and if there was any areas that needed any kind of special protection. And all that information on the ecological assessment was fed into the risk assessment. This is a larger picture of the arena area itself. The area is outlined in green, and each of the red dots and some of the other black dots are site investigation locations where we've taken soil or groundwater samples. So we've got quite a comprehensive assessment of that property itself, and that was included as part of an investigation of the larger southern portion of the property. This was not an individual isolated investigation. So within the arena area itself, we've taken soil samples from 20 locations, done about 3,800 chemical analyses. Groundwater, we've got 7 monitoring wells on that portion of the property. And we've analyzed for about 600 individual parameters on those samples. When we get all this data in, the initial step is to compare it to the existing MOE standards. These are now all laid out in the regulation. There were a number of exceedances identified, but overall, there were only fairly minor soil and groundwater exceedances found on the property, and they were quite limited within the proposed arena area. But it was decided the best approach to take on this was to conduct a risk assessment, because it considers a broad range of factors and allows us to develop, rather than the generic standards, property-specific standards that can be reviewed and approved by the ministry. One of the most important things that came out of our investigation is this last bullet, that we didn't identify any concerns related to volatile organic compounds on the property. And this is of particular importance because typically it's volatile organic compounds that present the greatest concern related to health impacts. They tend to be volatile materials that will move through the subsurface. They can get into cracks in buildings. They can accumulate in utility lines, get into buildings through cracks and floor slabs. And there's been discussion by others about the site in Aurelia, where they're proposing to put arena in, where they had some real issues. And the big difference between this property and the Aurelia property is that the main contaminants of concern in Aurelia are volatile organic compounds. And that's quite a different story than what we're dealing with here. There were concerns raised about the potential for any impacts on adjacent surface water bodies, and the 2 surface water bodies of concern here are on either side of the SciTech property. We've got the Chippewa Power Canal a short distance to the west, and the Niagara River Gorge is a short distance to the east. So we started out just by making sure that there was no groundwater use in the area, which there isn't. And then we developed a 3-dimensional groundwater flow model using all the available data that we had for the entire site. As I said, that included something in the order of 130 monitoring wells and quite a lot of additional borehole information. What we found in this study is that the groundwater flow is radially outward from the arena area, and it typically goes pretty much like the spokes of a wheel outward from you consider the high point in the arena area, and it radiates outward from that, predominantly towards the power canal and to the river. Down on top of the flow model, we also did a transport model, and we used the groundwater quality data that we had from all the monitoring wells in the southern portion of the property. The model projected what impacts there may be on these adjacent water bodies, and it was concluded that there would be no measurable impacts on either the Niagara River or the Chippewa Power Canal. And that model was documented in our report, which in turn was included in the risk assessment and was part of the submission to the MOE for review during their evaluation of the risk assessment. This is a picture of the overall property, and it goes somewhat beyond the property, both to the power canal on the west and the Niagara River Gorge on the east, showing the groundwater flow directions in the bedrock. And again, you focus your attention on the area for the arena down here, and these are groundwater contours, and these are groundwater flow directions. You can see that from the area of the arena, there will be no flow from other areas of the property. So one of the concerns was, well, maybe the arena area isn't contaminated, but what about groundwater moving onto the property from other areas of the SciTech site? And the modeling and the groundwater flow figures that were developed clearly show that that's not going to be the case, that the groundwater flow is away from the arena, so that there's no concern about something from beyond the arena property coming back onto the property and contaminating it. During the detailed assessment on the southern area of the property, we identified a couple of locations where we had a slightly elevated arsenic concentration in the soil. And this was evaluated in some of the preliminary stages of the risk assessment. And the findings of the risk assessment were that it would be quite safe to leave that arsenic-impacted soil in place, knowing that it was going to be covered under asphalt and the building floor slabs for any proposed structures of the arena. But in discussions with the MOE and the city, and because of public perceptions about arsenic, that's a nasty-sounding name, nasty-sounding contaminant, it was agreed with all parties that rather than trying to explain why it was safe to leave it there, we would avoid that problem by taking it away. So we did a much more detailed delineation of that area where we found the arsenic. It was all located along the west boundary of the proposed arena property. We developed a full delineation both with area and with depth. We developed a remedial plan that we discussed with the ministry, and it was a very simple dig it out, take it away plan. The ministry was fine with that. We implemented that last summer in August, September. All the impacted soil was excavated, taken off-site to an approved landfill. The entire area was backfilled with clean soil, graded for proper drainage, and that has all since been documented in a remedial report. It will also be supporting our record of site condition. So that work is all completed, and the arsenic concern no longer exists. Now, there's other work done at the site recently by the city's own consultants. This is not work that we did, but Niagara Falls retained a consultant to do quite detailed geotechnical investigations around the full 16-acre area of the proposed arena property. And their work included about 80 test pits, but I think it was actually about 93 test pits and trenches that they dug, and they drilled 32 boreholes in that area. They were looking for geotechnical issues, but they were also looking for any signs of any environmental problems and contamination. Many of the holes were done through the floor slabs. As I said earlier, about half of that area is covered by thick steel reinforced concrete floor slabs. These additional investigations done by the city investigations found no evidence of any kind of buried waste, no tanks or anything else that caused them to have any concern that there may have been anything missed with respect to possible contamination in that area. SciTech also did some work in conjunction with that. Because some concerns have been raised about the possibility of toxic or hazardous gases being generated in the area, when the trenches were dug, SciTech's health and safety staff went out and they inspected all the trenches for using field instrumentation, checking for various types of vapors and gases, and none were found during these investigations. So once we've completed all the site assessment work, it was put together into a report providing quite a comprehensive interpretation of the data. It was a very long report. It included all the laboratory reports, all the supporting documentation, so that all that supporting detail was available for anybody who cared to review it. That full report is included as part of the risk assessment that went to the MOE. It's available in the public library, and it's been reviewed by quite a number of parties, I believe. The results from our work were provided to Cantox as the basis of conducting their risk assessment. And on the basis of all the data that was provided based on the site assessment work, they did a fully comprehensive human health and ecological risk assessment. And that's basically where we passed over to Glenn, and I will let him, Dr. Ferguson, take over and talk about the rest of the, how all this data that was generated was used in conducting the site assessment work.
Just before you step down, I think the one question we might have is with regard to the VOCs, and could you just address and expand upon the comments you made with respect to the volatile organic compounds in respect to Aurelia? What are they comprised of, and what's the difference between there and here, please?
Well, it probably was better, Glenn's actually got a slide on that.
Okay.
But, just very briefly, the materials that we're dealing with here are typically metals and a few PAHs that don't produce gases or vapors that can migrate through the soil or can collect in trenches or get into buildings. In the Aurelia site, there was a whole group of compounds known as fluorinated solvents. Probably the best known one and the one of greatest concern is trichloroethylene, or TCE. And these are solvents that were used historically for degreasing operations, manufacturing of other solvents and so on. And these materials, they're much more highly soluble than any of the types of materials we have on the SciTech property. They tend to give off gases or vapors that, if the groundwater has these impacts, the gases can get into the soil above the groundwater. If there are utility trenches or conduits, they can move through those. They can get into buildings. They can get into utility vaults. And they tend to be much more toxic than the types of materials that we're dealing with too. So the fact that they're more toxic, they're more mobile, and they can move through their subsurface, puts that into a whole different category than the type of risks we're dealing with at the SciTech site. We don't have the materials that are volatile and are as mobile as those types. And Dr. Ferguson can provide further details on that one.
Thank you very much.
Good evening, Your Worship, Councillors. It's a pleasure to appear before you again and answering your questions and go over some of the process that was involved with the risk assessment that we did on the SciTech site. The first step I'm going to go through is to David Sham already spoke a little bit about the regulatory review process that this went through, but I just wanted to touch on a few things. Risk assessments must be completed under Reg 153 by a qualified person, and it's a very detailed requirement, so that it's a reliance on which the expertise and the experience of that individual, we have to sign off on these issues, and it's legally binding document with respect to the risk assessment. So it's very stringent as to what's required to do it. There's a pre-submission form that you first do. Basically, you align everything that you're going to do with that particular risk assessment. You're notifying the ministry. This is the plan we're going to go through, and it's basically the start of the whole process. So you assign the scenarios you're going to assess, the process you're going to go through, and the ministry will say, yes, they agree with this. Don't forget to do this. This is probably the process you should be following. Then that's followed by a submittal of a full risk assessment. Then the ministry reviews that. Now, there's multiple portions to that review. The ministry has internal review experts, and David already touched on a number of those. They also pass it out for external peer review by qualified firms, and there's 6 highly qualified firms that have been hired by the ministry to specifically go through and evaluate these risk assessments to ensure that they meet the requirements of the regulations here in Ontario. Comments are then provided by the ministry back to the consulting firms and to the proponent to evaluate, and responses and revisions, if necessary, of the risk assessment are provided by the proponent. Then it's up to the ministry whether they'll provide whether they're going to approve the final risk assessment. The objectives of a risk assessment under Reg 153 are first to evaluate human and ecological health risks associated with impacted soils and groundwaters as it pertains to the proposed site use. In this case, it's a commercial, industrial, or community land use. And to propose property-specific standards for soil and groundwater protective of human and ecological health for receptors both on-site as well as off-site that could potentially be impacted by any chemicals that may be on the site. The risk assessment paradigm that's used is a standardized protocol that's used throughout the world. This approach has been developed by the U.S. EPA, the World Health Organization, many other regulatory jurisdictions. This is the approach that has been accepted by the Ministry of the Environment to conduct risk assessments under Regulation 153. I won't go through the whole process, but it starts with a problem formulation where you gather all the information, you evaluate exposures to the chemicals that you discover, you evaluate it versus the toxicity, and then you come up with a characterization of risk. Once you have that and you know what kind of risks you have, you can move to risk management and evaluate how you're going to address these concerns. Throughout that whole process, there's an ongoing cycle of collection and validation of the data. At one step, it may say, I need more data, so you go back and get more data. At the same time, there's always public consultation and scientific communication to the stakeholders. And as has been discussed in previous presentations here, that has been going on throughout this whole process. So what scenarios were evaluated? There are some discussions of how we assess these risks. Well, the process we use is when we develop a list of chemicals to assess, we screen them against the ministry's criteria. Any that are exceeding the criteria, we do a full detailed risk assessment of it. And what we do is we set up hypothetical scenarios, exposure scenarios. These scenarios are people that may be potentially exposed and are at the highest risk to exposure to these chemicals. In this case, we set up 4 hypothetical scenarios that we thought would be the most stringent involved. One is an outdoor maintenance worker who spends 8 hours per day, 5 days per week, 40 weeks per year for a 30-week. They're basically out there cutting any grass, repairing, doing any outdoor repairs. So they have direct exposure to this. One has to be aware, when we say that these risks were evaluated, this is assuming there is no parking lot there, But to take a step back, the ministry requires us to assess risks in the absence of any potential risk management. In the case of the parking lot, it provides a barrier. Obviously, you can't get to contaminated soils or groundwater. So what we have to do to assess risks is we first assess it assuming nothing was done. So those outdoor workers were out there as the site is currently being exposed for 8 hours per day, 5 days per week, 40 weeks per year for 30 years, exposed to the soils and doing whatever they may be doing out there. Same thing with construction remediation worker, digging trenches, doing the development work, 10 hours per day, 5 days per week, 48 weeks per year for that 1-year construction period. A full-time worker within the facility, driving a Zamboni or whatever they may be doing, is attending the ice in the cafe or what have you, 10 hours per day, 5 days per week, 48 weeks per year, 30 years for their lifetime. These are very stringent criteria. And the final one, which has been obviously brought up a number of times, a toddler attending a daycare on the property. As I'll mention on the next slide, this is not a planned use, but it was one of the most stringent possible uses that could be done in this kind of a scenario. It was assumed that a toddler would be there 10 hours per day, so 8.5 hours indoors, and spending an hour and a half outdoors, 5 days a week, 48 weeks per year for the time before they head off to school. So the daycare issue, this has been brought up by Mr. Gillespie and whatever. Daycare was never intended for use in this current property. It was included as a hypothetical worst-case use. The ministry excluded daycare because the proposed community use category does not permit daycare. This daycare exclusion was based on land use restrictions, not health concerns. The ministry reviewed the assessment. They did not disagree that the risks to an individual, a child there in a daycare, there was no risk. What they said is you cannot do it because it does not fall in the proper land use characterization. So it's completely based on land use. It has nothing to do with health. There are absolutely no health concerns to children using the proposed arena facility. The results of the risk assessment showed no unacceptable health risks to human receptors under any of those evaluated worst-case scenarios. And remember, I said not only is it assessed in the absence of risk management, so assume that there was no parking lot there and what have you, nothing blocking potential exposures. The west side of the property, as Jeff Westerby already mentioned, arsenic did exceed the health-based property-specific standard that the risk assessment established at a single soil sample location. As a result, on a risk basis, because it's going to be covered by a parking lot, we could have argued that, look, there's no exposure, there's no concern to that. But in consultation with the city and the ministry, the area was delineated and removed and backfilled with clean soil. As a result, there's no arsenic on the site that exceeds the ministry's criteria at this point. Ecological impacts. Because of the nature of the soils in the area, they are affected by elevated things called soil absorption ratio, electrical conductivity, and selenium. Basically, this is just soil quality issues. It's poor soil, really, to raise really rare plants, and that's what the criteria is based upon. Very sensitive grains and what have you. Anybody that's driven past the plant site at any time know that it's not a moonscape there. There's quite a bit of vegetation there throughout the whole site. It does not have a problem. But as a result of it exceeding it for those particular criteria, a risk management plan was put in place that said anytime landscaping is put on the site, and bear in mind that's going to be very restricted because you saw the map, it's mostly the arena facility itself and parking lots. So there may be strips of grass along the side or some shrubs and what have you. The risk management plan then says anytime that's done, you put clean soil around the base of it, and you move on. This is the same approach that was used in the McBain Community Center in its development. The status, we've already sort of gone over this, but we'll touch on it one more time. The risk assessment was submitted to the ministry May 26th, 16-acre. We got response on August 15th. Notice the director's decision to accept the risk assessment October 13th. You can review a complete copy of the risk assessment. The city clerk still has it in his office, and you can get it at the main branch of Niagara Falls Public Library. It will also be, once we've completed the record of site condition, be posted on the environmental registry. Certificate of property use, a draft CPU was prepared by the ministry. It was posted on the EVR for a 30-day comment period. The director provided his decision, a leave to appeal was filed, and it was denied just yesterday. So the next steps. The record of site condition is going to be developed by SciTech. It's going to be submitted to the ministry. The ministry, if it accepts it, will post it on the Brownfield Environmental Site Registry. And following that, depending on the acceptance of the current council, the property could be is available for transfer to the city. There was some discussion with respect to comparisons to Aurelia. I am also involved in the Aurelia project. I'll speak to you how I'm involved. The city of Aurelia, just to give you some background information, purchased the property without sufficient environmental characterization or a record of site condition. Basically, they just took it. There were significant soil and groundwater impacts from chlorinated VOCs on the site, trichloroethylene, vinyl chloride, and a number of related solvents on it. Cantox Environmental, firm I am involved with, and Gardner Lee were retained by the city to provide expert advice following the discovery of the serious environmental conditions. So we provided guidance to the city on how to make its way through the process, provided peer review of the assessment team that was actually doing the work to ensure that they could properly get through the process. We were not involved in it. We did not miss the problems. We were not the engineering firm or the consulting firm that were originally involved in the project. We were hired by the city to provide them with guidance on these, and we've done this for a number of other municipalities. City of Niagara Falls, on the other hand, has indicated they will not accept the property, will only accept the property after a full environmental characterization, an approved risk assessment, and a record of site condition. So that's night and day compared to what Aurelia did. There's minimal soil and groundwater impacts on this site. There's no VOCs at all, and you've retained an environmental consultant early in the process to provide your own peer review. That concludes my portion of it. So I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Okay, members of council, do you have any questions for Dr. Ferguson? Okay, thank you, Doctor. We appreciate your submission.
My pleasure.
And at this point, I'd like to acknowledge the fact that we have our Associate Medical Officer of Health present, Dr. Douglas Sider, along with Bjorn Christensen from the Niagara Regional Public Health Department. Dr. Sider, do you want to come forward? Is there anything with respect to the file? We do have on file a letter from our Medical Officer of Health with respect to previous concerns, and we've been told there's been no issues with respect to the Niagara Regional Health Unit. Can you confirm any of that for us, Doctor?
Yes, thank you, and good evening, Mayor Salsi, members of council. I'm just pleased that as a presenter, and I will be brief, I don't have to acknowledge in a self-incriminating fashion that although I've worked in Niagara region for 4.5 years, I live in Hamilton, so I'm shamefaced by that, but let me proceed nonetheless. It would be, given the amount of material that council has had to digest, I want to reiterate what Mayor Salsi has said. There's what I think is a very nice summary of a number of health-related issues that were addressed by Dr. Robin Williams and presented to council, in addition to the letter contained in your council report. And I think it would be a bit presumptuous of me to read the report. You folks have had access to it, so I'd be happy to answer any questions. But basically, the letter addressed the Public Health Department's support for the environmental risk assessment process that we've heard about in some detail this evening. It also addressed two separate issues which have not appeared in terms of the issues addressed by the delegations. That related to issues around potential for a health study in the areas and neighborhoods around the Cyanum and the SciTech property, and the other issue was a cancer cluster study. In both instances, the Public Health Department recommended strongly against both steps being taken, and the reasons for that, many of the challenges and methodologic pitfalls that would be involved in such studies are outlined in the letter written by Dr. Williams to this council that's contained in the report. So I'm happy to answer any questions, but I promise to be brief.
Thank you, Doctor. Are there any questions, Dr. Sider, from members of council? Yeah. Thank you very much, Doctor. Appreciate that.
I too promise to be brief. But one of the questions that have been brought up time and time again is that the city should undertake the time and the resources and the costs to do an independent study of what's been done and of this site. And our recommendation is that that's not necessary, and the time and the cost is not worth it. We'll arrive at the same conclusion. But more importantly, the reason for it is that there has been extensive independent peer review done. Independent expert reviews. There's been the public involved, the user groups, while not experts. They've had a lot to say about this process. The first experts that the city retained to undertake this review were Acres back in the mid-90s. And they assisted the city in looking at remediation alternatives proposed by SciTech, and I'll talk a bit about that in a subsequent slide. We've talked at length about the MOE participation in this process, and in my opinion, that is expert independent review, including the use of outside consultant teams to review these things. We've just heard from Dr. Sider about the request from the mayor and the CAO to get involved and answer some very specific questions, which they did, and that letter is included in your council package. My firm and myself, Urban and Environmental, have been involved in this project since the get-go. I will talk a bit more about that. We've also, under our supervision, hired Chagrahims to do geotechnical. As Jeff Westerby said, thousands, and if I add the numbers up correctly, 42,000 different tests, soil tests and groundwater tests for chemical parameters have been done, and they've been done by independent certified laboratories. So when they do the tests, they don't do it themselves, they send it off to a certified laboratory. So certainly another step in the process of independent review. And, you know, in my view, the review by the Environmental Review Tribunal, if you get time to read that decision, again, is it's independent review. Acres and Associated in the 97 presented a couple of reports for council. As I mentioned, they represented the city on that basis. They provided some real input in terms of identifying the need for further options in the remediation of these properties, and an expanded monitoring program for groundwater, surface water, and gas. They also hosted on behalf of the city a public meeting, and input was received back then. So the public process on this site was as way back as 1996. The recommendations provided by Acres were used by SciTech in the work that was presented to you tonight. And most recently, Acres worked on the CIP as the environmental consultant on that project. Myself, I've personally been involved in several environmental assessments around this property, the Niagara helicopter property across the street on Stanley. I've been involved in this for many, many years in terms of my involvement in the city, independently of work for the city as well. I've reviewed all the historical documentation undertaken by SciTech and provided comments to the city, and offered suggestions to SciTech and the city, and, for example, the arsenic removal. Worked closely with the Ministry of the Environment on this project, and certainly ensured on behalf of the city that the provincial regulations and the process was followed. And most recently, I assisted the city legal team in ensuring that the agreements included the proper environmental conditions. The geotechnical investigations, Jeff talked about them, the 83 test pits and the 32 boreholes. It was done as part of the design project in consultation with ourselves and Denny Bryan, the architect. And they did an extensive subsurface investigation. And as Jeff mentioned, it was more than just looking and developing design parameters for the arena design and the architect. It was also to look and see if there was any problems. So we expanded their terms of reference on that. And I mean, they found, as we expected they would found, foundations, concrete slabs, fill material, what have you. But they concluded that this was a good site geotechnically, that the native soils are competent. There will be some rubble and foundations and that will require removal, and we've considered that in terms of the project schedule. But it's their conclusion, and it's supported by us that this is a suitable site from a geotechnical point of view for the proposed arena complex. Whoops. And that's about all we have to say tonight. I think, my conclusion is, as your consultant and your project manager on this, is that we would like to move forward with this site. We think the questions that have been raised and have been answered to our satisfaction, and we think it's time to move on.
Thank you, Mr. Tram. Are there any questions from members of council with respect to the presentation so far? Councilor Iannone?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just this comment, if there's anything the newspapers are going to print, it should highlight the need for the residents to watch this telecast. Because I learned so much through this last 2.5 hours. Any question I had was based on perception of residents as we went door to door and their concerns on that site. I think if they watch this whole thing, it'll alleviate a lot of concerns and a lot of misconceptions that people have on this property. So I really think that the consultants, whether you're for or against it being on that site, for coming out and doing this presentation, because I think it's a real eye-opener.
I think those comments are appropriate. Thank you, Councillor. At this time, members of council, I'm going to allow Mr. Gillespie to come back to the podium. Mr. Gillespie, you're welcome to come back. I would like to caution you, though, this is not a debate. If you have any questions that have not been addressed to the consultants, I'd appreciate those, but please list them and we'll deal with them, but it's not a debate.
Your Worship, I think Councillor Iannone has just said the completely appropriate words. This has been a real eye-opener. The reason it's been a real eye-opener is this is not the same presentation that was given back in October. There is a great deal of new information. I think we have heard tonight new data, new responses, a 25-page ERT report, information on Aurelia that wasn't available before. As I understand it, Mr. Piccioni gave a presentation that we haven't seen before. There's a great new amount of data that Councillor Iannone personally referred to as eye-opening. Clearly, that couldn't have been here before unless our eyes were closed. So, on that basis, at this time, the fact of the matter is that we are in the exact situation that I was concerned about. You, sir, indicated earlier that you were of the view that this was going to be the end of everything tonight. You indicated that on the record, sir. And at that point, in my view, and with great respect, Council has shown a closed mind to addressing the concerns our clients have.
Your Worship, if I could just interrupt, the mayor did not speak for all of the council.
This is not a debate.
The mayor did not speak for all of the council, Your Worship.
This is not a debate.
And I'm not sure what he's trying to do.
We'll deal with that. We'll give you an opportunity in a second. Let's let him speak.
So, my concern fundamentally is that council, at least expressed by the mayor, and if the mayor doesn't speak for council, I'm surprised, but so be it. In that case, what we have now is all of this new information and no opportunity to deal with it. And it's clearly informing council and opening their eyes, and certainly it comes as a big surprise to myself and certainly to my client, who were at the previous meeting. They had membership there throughout, and they're hearing all kinds of new things. So we fundamentally face a problem where I cannot begin to respond to all of what has come before council in the way of new information tonight without some reasonable opportunity to do so. And unfortunately, because council's already shut that door.
No, they have not shut the door, Mr. Gillespie, and my comment to you was we were hoping that we would answer all your questions this evening. You heard from our CAO, you heard from our clerk, and also from members of council. We will give you the opportunity to bring matters forward as you see fit with regard to any questions that your client has. So there's been no decision made. There hasn't been any pre-conclusion with respect to the presentation this evening. So I think your assumptions are incorrect, and I qualify that for the record. So as I'm saying to you before, this has not been, the matter has not been concluded. We hope that tonight would answer your questions. We have all the experts here. You heard from our staff with respect to that, and we have given you an opportunity to pose any questions that you believe have not been addressed. And that's the opportunity you still have now before you. Matter is not closed, so I'll correct your comments from that perspective. So if you have questions, please pose them. If you have not, we appreciate your submission.
Well, at this point, I guess fundamentally, the questions arise from the large amount of new material. I am not going to attempt to propose that I'm qualified to even ask all of the questions. And what I will say from tonight's presentation is this. There are a number of areas. I appreciate that council has now left the door open to address them in the future. We will be back before council, I'm sure, and do so.
No, that's not the case, Mr. Gillespie. I'm asking you again, if you have any questions that you feel have not been addressed by all the consultants we've gathered here this evening, please pose them. So you have that opportunity to do so. There'll be future discussion with regard to bylaw matters, but that's a different issue. Tonight we're talking about technical issues. We hoped to have the matter dealt with so that you'd have a chance to ask your questions. You haven't asked any questions to this point. Do you have any questions of all the consultants and the experts that we have in the room this evening?
There are dozens of questions that have been raised. They are technical in nature.
Do you have any questions that have not been answered?
With great respect, there are dozens of questions that have been raised that have not been and cannot be tonight posed and answered because they bring up new technical areas, and it's not possible when you hear entirely new series of an entirely new presentation and new matters coming before council to sit here right now and have the kind of dialogue that's helpful to anyone.
Well, Mr. Gillespie, we've taken the time, we've gathered the experts together based on some comments that your client has made with respect to the situation and the conditions that exist on this site that you believe that were correct or incorrect in their assumption. We've had a chance to listen to the experts present that evidence to us, and we've dealt with it. So if you have no further questions, I thank you for your submission this evening.
My question is, sir, why are you not allowing my client to address all kinds of new information in a fair and proper manner?
Well, we have done so. We've already actually given you that opportunity to pose any questions you have. It's not a debate. We're not here to have you try to punch holes in the experts' opinions. If you had a question that wasn't dealt with, please present those.
Me asking questions, Your Worship, would be a debate and would be cross-examining them.
It's not that
we are asking for the opportunity to respond to new information. You're denying it. No. That in my submission is a breach of the rules of natural justice and procedure.
I think council will make that deliberation at a later date, but at this point, you have an opportunity to bring anything forward that's on your mind or your client's mind in respect to that. So thank you very much. I appreciate that. Members of council? Yes, Mr. Clerk?
I don't want to belabor this, but I'm having so much fun, why not? Number one, there isn't much difference in the PowerPoint presentations that you've seen this evening as the ones in October. I have no problem sitting side by side with Mr. Gillespie and going through those PowerPoints to go over what has changed. But the fact of the matter is, those PowerPoint presentations were emailed to Mr. Mark Holland of Unite here in October of last year. I also emailed Mr. Gillespie and said the format for tonight's meeting will be similar to the information workshop in October. So the insinuation that this is brand new information is really ridiculous. And we're not asking you to respond to anything that's been presented tonight. Make your presentation. Show us that PowerPoint that you wanted to present. I mean, obviously you have information that you want to present. Present it. This is your opportunity to do so. And to say that there's a lot of new information, the new information is really information responding to the concerns that have been raised by Unite Here up to this point. This isn't new information. These are answers to the things that Unite Here have brought up. You know, so to say that this is new information that's been generated by Unite Here, and we've responded as professionals. So, you know, Yes, this is going in a circle, but I think the fact has to be made that this information is very similar to the information presented in October. Unite Here has copies of those PowerPoint presentations for October. I emailed them to Mr. Holland, and I also sent him hard copies of those.
And
Thank you, Mr. Clerk, for your opinion and your comments. And
Your Worship, if I may simply ask a question, sir, and I think this will assist all of us in resolving this matter. I appreciate what Mr. Iafita has said. I respect the fact that there are rational ways to deal with these types of matters. I think the rational way is if Mr. Iafita says everything that was previously presented is already in my client's possession, and he's volunteered, as I understand it, to at least in person, but I'm going to ask him to simply send us the copies of the presentations from tonight, and the record will speak for itself. So, through you, sir, I'd ask Mr. Iafita to simply do the same thing that he did the last time.
I think the clerk can accomplish that task. Thank you again.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Yes, sir. Councilor Ioannoni.
Yeah, last time I checked, Mr. Mayor, I don't sleep much through these meetings, so I'm pretty sure my eyes have been open. And Mr. Gillespie, for you to make that comment to me, who has deferred every vote at this table when you brought up a new concern, I think is extremely insulting. I've made sure that they've answered the questions that you've put before this council. I make no apologies for making deferrals, because if somebody tells me that it's not approved for a daycare because kids will get sick, you can bet as a mother of four, I'm the first on my feet to say, defer anything we're doing there. What I learned tonight was that's not the case. Residents sitting at home will understand there's two sides to every story.
Excuse me, this is not a debate. Please be seated. The councilor has the floor, so thank you very much.
And I will ask Your Worship's permission, because these remarks are directed in a certain direction, for the opportunity to respond.
It's a comment directed to the chair, but please have your seat.
And I direct my comments to you as well,
Please be
Your
seated.
Worship.
Thank you.
There were accusations made, there were suggestions that that property wasn't safe. We deferred meetings, leaving that hanging in the air, so that's what people thought were actually fact. When I say that this will be a big eye-opener for residents, I think it's because, as Janice and I were talking here, it's finally all on camera. You can put every piece together. Everybody's in the same room. Everybody was able to ask questions. I was able to go through as much as this Environmental Review Tribunal decision, Cushman versus Director Ministry of the Environment, as I could read while we were going through this meeting. The questions on the arsenic and the cyanides and the ammonias and the arsenics, a lot of these are in here. To me, this is a huge eye-opener too, which I'm assuming will be made public if it's not already. I just think that we have far more information than we had long before we put all the parties together. And I'm a little upset that often an accusation is made here in regards to this land, which I've never voted for, I might add, so I'm hardly pro-developer here. But every time the questions are asked, the people aren't here to answer them. We've assembled everybody to answer the questions. The taxpayers are paying for these people to be here to answer these questions tonight. Tonight's the forum. We often have a developer stand here, make a presentation, and the applicant, or people in opposition, ask questions while the applicant or his lawyer is standing behind, taking questions, standing up at the podium, then answering the concerns they have. We watch it every week. If you have concerns, put them here now, because I'd have a whole lot more respect for your position if that were the case. But don't jerk us around, leave, and then come back and expect us to support the concerns you have when everybody who can answer those questions are in this council chamber.
Okay. Thank you, Councilor. Any other comments from members of council? Yes, Councilor Maves.
I'd just like to make a comment that as a new councilor, I have adequate information on all this issue, and I'm very pleased with the presentation tonight.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Members of council, we have before us a report CAO 200-06 for the recommendation of, for the information of council. What's your pleasure? Motion to receive by Councilor Ioannoni, seconded by Councilor Fisher. Any further discussion? Having seen none, all those in favor? The motion is carried unanimously. We have noted the exception and the conflict of Councilor Carrio. Okay, and before us, Mr. Clerk.
I mean, when we have a meeting, we have a confirmatory bylaw. I would just ask that you pass that, not that it really means too much tonight.
So a motion to have the bylaw confirmed with ratification in respect to the activity of this meeting, moved by Councilor Pietrangelo, seconded by Councilor Maves. You've heard the question. Any discussion? All those in favor? Motion is carried. Mr. Clerk. Okay? And at this time, members of council, the meeting is concluded, but I'd ask you to recess to a meeting in camera for a matter of personnel and HR, if we could just take a few moments in Committee Room 1. Thank you, members of council, for attending, and thank you for all those who spent time listening and the experts who gave us input. Thank you again.